I don't really have any personal connection to Wario as a character. I think the first time I saw and recognized him was in that one E3 trailer for Brawl, where he crashes his motorcycle and fucking dies. It's due to this lack of experience with the character that I always ignored his games, the Wario Land series. Maybe it's because, as a kid at least, his iconic nature wasn't embedded into my brain yet. You look at Mario and Sonic, it can easily attach yourself to them, especially since the entry gate for their games is so wide and they're fucking everywhere. There's almost always a new Mario or Sonic game coming out, but the last Wario Land game came out in 2008. After that, Nintendo decided the best route for Wario was WarioWare, which is how a lot of people were introduced to the character. You know, besides the Mario spin-offs. I'm only explaining this because I'm about to talk about the entire series of Wario Land games. I've never played these games all the way through until now. I've never seen anyone look at them with the level of critique and analysis I think they deserve. This is sorta odd considering how much this franchise has achieved a cult classic status, especially in recent years. It's not like Mario or Sonic where, mostly Sonic, where my own nostalgic bias will come out when discussing the games, and that's not to say Wario Land is cut and dry. There's a lot to talk about with the franchise, and I think this shit is interesting, so I'm gonna talk about it. Oh, and this isn't my be-all end-all opinion piece, by the way. This is literally my first time playing them all the way through, so I imagine my thoughts on them will change over time. I just play a lot of video games and have a lot of shit to say about stuff like this. Usually there's no reason to bring this up. You'd think no one would be an elitist about Wario. But Jesus Christ, there's a 600-page novel about Wario Land 4, where the dude literally proclaims that it's the most deep and comprehensive piece of writing ever written about a video game. Take your head out of your ass, you're talking about a Game Boy game! The first game in the franchise was actually created as a response to the Mario Land series, hence the name Wario Land, Mario Land 3, which is a shitty name. Should've named Knuckles Chaotix, Knuckles the Echidna, Sonic 4. Nah, but I get it. Mario Land 1 and 2 sold crazy well, so they probably didn't want to stagnate creatively. Why not create a new franchise by making it part of an already existing successful one? I mean, it sorta makes sense. Wario is the villain of Mario Land 2 and everything. This is the guy that came up with Wario, by the way. He wanted him to be like the Bluto to Mario's Popeye. Wario's design is even directly based on Bluto. And this, weirdo from Pinocchio or something. Hiroji Kiyotake. He also directed the game, Mario Land 2 and Wario Land. He co-directed Wario Land with Takehiko Hosokawa, who did work for Metroid Fusion. He also did work for Other M, which is,
Remember me? Me?
I never played it. I played 2 seconds of Metroid Prime and got a headache, so maybe those games just aren't for me. Hosokawa is actually a huge Metroid guy, working on almost every major entry minus the Prime series. These two worked on Wario pretty closely together with a Hirofumi Matsuoka until Wario Land 4, which is kind of a shame. None of them worked on Shake It, even in advising roles. Maybe that's why that game's only okay, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I feel like Kiyotake specifically could have had a great future as a games director, since the games he directed ended up being grouped with my favorites. But the guy seems like more of an artist. Yeah, even looks like Wario. Anyway, when you boot the game up, you get, oh my god! Jesus! Turn that down. Game Boy's sound chip sounds like someone ripping ass. Listen to this first level theme.
Pizza Day!
Oh, that's cute. It's like the Mario Land 2 save room. You know, this game is sort of a lot like Mario Land 2. The save rooms look the same, get to run around our little world map, Mario and Wario get weird hats. Maybe it's just because these games share a director, or maybe it's because they wanted players jumping from Mario Land 2 to feel comfortable, but it's a little odd. I mean, there's enough differences between them, of course, specifically with how the characters operate, but these similarities even cross over into the plot of the game. I can't say with assurance why. There isn't a lot of information about Wario Land 1 in terms of, interviews and shit, or any of the Wario Land games for that matter. What I do know is, I like this game. Wario's moveset is pretty unique from Mario's. You're not just running and jumping. In fact, Wario can't run at all, at least not in this game. His top speed is reached when doing a shoulder bash, which can break through blocks and walls. This makes it your primary mobility option and offensive option. You got these cool hat-based power-ups that let you fly forward, stick to walls, blow fire. You can also pick things up like enemies and throw them, which is mostly used for bosses in this game, but becomes a core mechanic in puzzle solving and platforming in future entries.
Really? Oh wait.
There's some pretty fun optional goodies you can get with the hats, like traveling underneath the conveyor by sticking to the bottom of it to get extra coins, or blowing out blocks with fire to reach a secret area underwater. This is a Game Boy game, so I can trust I don't need my character's moveset to be all that fancy for me to have fun. But it thankfully isn't too simplistic to the point where it's uninventive or unimaginative. It strikes a good balance. This isn't fucking Donkey Kong. And I don't mean Donkey Kong for arcades, or Donkey Kong 64. I mean Donkey Kong for Game Boy. Have you fucking seen this shit? Mario's got fucking handstands, fucking triple jump, side flips, swinging around like a monkey. I played this shit without knowing any of that. I just played it like normal Donkey Kong. After you beat the original Donkey Kong stages, the game turns into this really fucking awesome puzzle platformer where you have to utilize your crazy moveset to get around, and it's fun. But I don't need that shit in Wario. The closest thing Wario has is this weird super jump you can perform by holding up while you jump, which isn't conveyed very well. I found myself doing it on accident a lot of the time, and it took me a while to figure out how to do it on purpose, but it's a pretty useful move. It ended up being the way I jumped all the time. There's no visual indicator for a super jump, which is a little strange, but it isn't hard to tell when you did it right, so it's not that big of a deal. Like I mentioned before, this game is structured almost exactly like Mario Land 2, in which you traverse a world map from level to level. Oddly enough, they took the ability to freely pick what level you want to play out in this game, which isn't so bad. It makes the world map purely flavorful, which is fine. They would eventually integrate open level progression back into the franchise by Wario Land 4, and it works great in that game, but again, I think it being a purely aesthetic choice here works fine. Some of this stuff looks pretty uncharacteristic of the game though. This mountain here looks like something out of fucking Adventure Time. It's gonna come alive and sing some gay song to me. There's only 40 courses in this game spread across 7 worlds, and while that kinda sounds like a lot, they're pretty short. I beat this shit in like 5 hours. Mario 1 has like 32 levels, and you only end up playing like 9 of them, and that shit takes 5 minutes.
What?
The level progression in this game is kinda lame. I mean, it's cool to have a world map and everything. It gives context to these levels I'm jumping around in. Since the game's on Game Boy though, I'm assuming there was some limitation to the artistic conveyance of each area, so they could only really give you a rough idea of where you're at. Hey wait, that doesn't make any sense. Fucking Mario Land 2 does it perfectly! All the areas on the map in that game convey the level you're about to play in a really fitting way while also looking pretty damn cool. Like in this Halloween zone, you can see coffins next to the level point on the map, and once you jump in, you're in a graveyard. Or in this underwater zone where you travel inside the sunken submarine on the map. It isn't purely flavorful like in Wario Land 1. That isn't to say Wario Land 1 doesn't have this either, but it's definitely more uninspired. Where Mario Land 2's world map prioritized contextualizing and connecting the levels to its set piece, Wario Land 1 only contextualizes the area. Sometimes the levels don't even feel like they belong in the world I'm in, like in this mountain area or in the woods. None of the set pieces are as extravagant, memorable, or as interesting as Mario Land. Like, I see this big tree. I get it. I'm climbing a big tree. There's a whole part in that game where you're climbing up a big Mario toy, platforming through its inner workings until you get to the top, and then holy shit, I'm in fucking space! Isn't that why Wario wanted to take over this shit in the first place? Cause it's fucking cool? Look at him running around like a turkey up there, he's fucking excited! In Wario Land, I'm just kinda dicking around on the beach. Where even am I? Is this supposed to be Mario Land? Where's all the cool shit? Is this Wario's Land? I'm not trying to say that I think this game doesn't look nice or has no interesting locales, but they're definitely a step down from its predecessor. I guess that makes it a bit more subdued, but for a self-proclaimed sequel, it definitely tones it down on the intrigue. Nah, maybe Wario's just a traditional kind of guy. Like, goes fishing with his son on the weekends. At least they got this shit right in Mario Land 4. That game doesn't even have a world map. Look at Donkey Kong. Look at Donkey Kong. Look at Donkey Kong. Something Wario Land 1 doesn't slack on is the boss department. They're all pretty great. To me, the mark of a great boss on a platformer is how much freedom you have in defeating it. The first boss in this game has his weak spot on his belly, and they want you to figure out a way to hit him while dealing with his movements. How I ended up doing it was shoulder bashing into him, waiting for him to float above me, and then reacting by jumping on his weak spot. These two actions both count as hits, but there's an even faster way of doing it I didn't even think of until I reviewed my footage. When he's floating up, you can jump directly onto his belly, and that counts for a hit. Then you can shoulder bash into him once he lands, and he's just done. This makes it like a 20-second boss in execution, but it's done in a really clever way. In hindsight, the fun of these bosses is learning how to deal with their patterns and realizing how I can extend my damage. I fucking hate platformer bosses that only let you hit them when they want. Not that the game controlling the pace of the fight is a bad thing, but it's often done in a really arbitrary way in most platformers. Even the final boss in this game allows you to extend your hits. You can jump on and off the platform you make for yourself multiple times, and I fucking love that shit. I think there was only really one boss that frustrated me, and it was this ghost guy, but I was being a little stupid while I was fighting him. You're supposed to grab the little ghost babies he chucks at you and chuck them back, but I kept getting stunned when he touched me because I was bad at recognizing his movement pattern. It also didn't help that the background is this puke nightmare. What is this shit? There's another really great boss, this bull dude. His whole thing is that he keeps grabbing you and trying to toss you into the lava, and you can't do any real damage to him by shoulder bashing or jumping on him. Eventually, you get so fed up that you end up wanting to toss him in the lava too, and that ends up being the solution. Like I mentioned before, the final boss is also really cool.
Look at the flick of the finger.
There's this lamp you have to throw in order to create a platform that rises up, allowing you to jump on his head and do damage. If you're quick enough, you can jump back onto the platform and hit him again. Eventually, the platform becomes an enemy you have to deal with, so you have to manage where you're throwing the lamp to create platforms, how fast you're going to be on attacking him, and where the enemy is going to end up for you to deal with. All the while, this fat genie motherfucker is flicking his fingers and shooting fireballs that travel on the floor at you. It's a great high-octane boss, and it's fucking awesome. Probably the highlight of the game, actually. It's kind of a shame boss design takes a backseat in the later games, barring Wario Land 4. They aren't overly complicated, but the design loop of learning their patterns and expanding upon damage is really fun, especially in tandem with Wario's moveset. The later games just kinda have you hit them. They can even feel like an afterthought. Some of them are even downright infuriating or conveyed horribly. They had a lot of room to express themselves with these bosses, which is evident not only with the way they're designed, but how they're programmed too, which is charming as fuck. The levels themselves are often structured as straight shots to the end, with secrets being housed in hard-to-reach areas in the rare, openly designed section. There's this really cool level early on where this thwomp is chasing you through a corridor, and you need to shoulder bash your way through before it crushes you. Once you get to the end of said corridor, it seems like there's no way to go until the thwomp finally catches up to you. You end up having to hitch a ride on top of it while dodging these bat dudes, and the game keeps enticing you with difficult to grab power-ups. It's a really cool, difficult, and memorable section. Kinda reminded me of something someone would make on Mario Maker. I sorta wish it was later in the game though, it's kinda hard. I think this game's level design really shines during its reaction-based sections. One of my favorite levels is Course 36. There's a section in this level where these spiked balls fall from the ceiling and start rolling towards you. Luckily there are these holes in the ground you can duck into to avoid getting hurt. If your reaction time is off and you miss ducking into the hole, you can always jump over them. It's a pretty simplistically designed challenge, but there are even more ways to avoid getting hurt than just that. If you have the Viking hat, you can stick to the ceiling here and have the spiked balls roll under you until it's clear to cross. If you have the flight hat, I imagine you would be able to fly forward at the peak of your jump to go over them, which is a faster option, but I don't have footage of this. This whole section makes me wish more parts of the game were designed like this. The game's more open moments feel a little directionless. Level design takes more of a forefront in the series' next game, but this game's simplicity gives it an interesting amount of depth that's hard to replicate without the specific hardware limitations the team were dealing with. There's a lot of things to this game that I could talk about despite it being a pretty short Game Boy game. For example, Wario wears a safari hat in this game instead of his signature yellow brim, which gives me an excuse to talk about the best puzzle game of all time, Picross! Or Picross! Everyone's fucking heard of Picross, but no one knows how to play this shit. I used to not care about Picross until my friend brought it up to me and said, "Hey, you know how to play this shit?" And he explained that shit to me. It's pretty simple, but without boring you with the details, you essentially cross-examine numbers to dictate where tiles are hiding to make little pictures like cats and shit. The first two on the Game Boy are fucking perfect games. The second one even has you traveling these cool little overworlds. They didn't have to do this shit at all and could have easily just made it a level select grid like in the first game, but god damn it, they gave a shit. Why am I even talking about this? Because Wario is in Picross 2, and he has the safari hat from Wario Land. Were you even paying attention? Wario's mode is kinda interesting. Instead of the game deducting time for making a mistake, the timer counts up and the game hides your mistakes from you. It's more of a time trial to see how quick you can solve a puzzle with no help. This shit gets really complicated later on, and eventually you're solving 4 puzzles at once to create this really intricate piece of art. I doubt we'll ever get another Mario Picross game, which is kind of a damn shame. The company behind these games, Jupiter, exclusively makes Picross games, and right now they're dedicated to their Picross S series, which has zero flavor. Like, yeah, it's Picross, but why's it gotta look like this? Picross DS had something going for it, why'd they throw it out for this flat look? What's a guy gotta do to get a AAA Picross game with Mario in it again? There's Picross 3D, which was made by HAL Laboratory, but I don't know, I could never get into it the same way as normal Picross. This shit requires like an elevated level of consciousness. I was interested in this game called Murder by Numbers, which has this cool gameplay premise of finding evidence to crimes through completing Picross puzzles, but the Steam reviews kind of turned me off to it, plus the art style isn't the greatest. Hey, where's my Mario and Sonic's Picross? Put Sonic in there, have him discover some fucking pyramid scrawlings with Mario. Give him a fucking safari hat. Mario Picross X? See classic video game characters such as Link, Mario, Sonic, Kirby, or even Jet Set Willy? This shit isn't real. Look at this fucking commercial for Mario Picross. Look at this one where Mario and Wario are commanding some slaves to do the Picross puzzles for them, the sick bastards. I like Picross. I also like the idea of Mario and Wario being mascots for their respective puzzle games. They started one of their own in the Japanese exclusive Mario and Wario, which sort of acts like a precursor to the Mini Mario series along with Donkey Kong 94. Anyway, Wario Land 1's a pretty great first entry. It's a pretty solid platformer, and I like it a lot more than Mario Land 2 in terms of gameplay, but there are a few areas of the game that could have been touched up to be even greater. That isn't to say this game lacks any personality, though. Its art direction and character designs definitely carry its charm on its shoulders. I just think with a few revisions, this game could have been greater than it already is. I'll cut it some slack though, since this is the first game and they were only trying to find their footing. Maybe they'll remake this game. There were some rumblings a couple years back of an upcoming return to form for the Wario Land series in the format of remakes for the first two games, but nothing's come of those. As is, this game's great to play while you're waiting for your plane to show up in transit on your 3DS. It plants the seeds for its sequels to expand upon its format and introduces an interesting world that can easily be capitalized in potential subsequent games. And that's exactly what they did by Wario Land 2. Fucking yeah, you fucking thought! It's Virtual Boy Wario Land, the real sequel to Wario Land 1. Get that Wario Land 2 shit the fuck out of here, bitch! Woo!
Time to play. Yep, Virtual Boy. This is Wario Land. I don't know why the screen is purple.
Yeah, so for whatever reason, Nintendo decided it would be a good idea to immediately follow up Wario Land with a Virtual Boy sequel. You don't need me to tell you the whole song and dance of the Virtual Boy. This thing flopped hard. The console really didn't have a killer app, and despite it being a headset, you couldn't play VR chat on it, so it was kind of doomed to fail from the start.
Suck my dick.
Still, you've got to commend Nintendo for even trying something like a dedicated headset console in the 90s. That idea on paper probably blew everyone's mind in the office room when they came up with it. That's some shit you'd see on The Simpsons as a gag at the time and laugh. Honestly, the hardware of the Virtual Boy isn't even that bad. It's a 32-bit console, and its only real technical drawback was its limited color palette. Even if the Virtual Boy had a full range of color, I feel like it wouldn't be as memorable or iconic of a console as it is nowadays. Its biggest prohibitor was its shitty library. In all honesty, the best game on the system is probably Wario Land. You know, unless you're counting Bound High, Mario Clash, Italo Boxer and Panic Bomber and Nestor's Funky Bowling.
Fair.
It's odd to me because the Virtual Boy seemed like a novelty on arrival, and who the fuck is buying a console for novelty in 1995? Plenty of people will buy this stupid crank Game Boy or cardboard bullshit now, but pull that shit back then and people are just gonna ignore you. At worst, they'll point and laugh, which is what ended up happening anyway. Everything surrounding the Virtual Boy's failure cements it as a joke to everyone, even Nintendo fans.
Mario, your eyes are all red. You've been playing Virtual Boy for 10 hours.
Hell, even Nintendo makes fun of this thing. Well, you know what? Fuck these guys, because Wario Land is fucking awesome. Imagine being a kid in 95 with this stupid robot tumor attached to your face while everyone makes fun of you on the bus ride home from school. Well, for all you know, they're an enemy in Wario. Fuck out of here!
Oh my god. Oh my god!
Before we start talking about the game, I guess I should give a prerequisite about what you're seeing right now. This is the game running off the emulator VB Jin. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to making games look the best they can on these things, and camera movement and fluid motion always seem to end up looking crusty, but I tried my best to make it look passable here. Due to the emulator, most of the 3D effects of items swinging from the foreground to the background look glitched, but only upon transition between the two planes, so I apologize for that. The emulator also automatically color corrects the Virtual Boy to this weird hot pinkish purple too, but I ended up really liking it. It exemplifies the way they use different shades a lot better than red or grayscale. I'm guessing it's because the emulator designates the left and right eye layers to blue and red respectively, making the mixture purple, which is kinda cool. Mostly everyone I've seen talk about Virtual Boy games online color correct the games from red to grayscale. Just kinda makes it boring. The Virtual Boy is comparable to the Game Boy, so fuck it, why not color correct it to green? I don't know, do something cool like AVGN did.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3?
He zoomed the camera into the lens of the actual console. That's gorilla as fuck. And you know what? Hold on. You remember when Let's Players would fucking do this shit? Prop their cameras up in front of their TVs and just talk over the game for 10 minutes, then upload it?
Oh man, I have a lot of games. Look at all these. Man. Look at all these. Sheesh. Oh, that's right, Mega Man 2. Alright, whatever.
Bring that shit back. When I originally got the idea for this video, I was really into modding and homebrew on my Wii, so I filled it with a fuck ton of emulators. I really like the homebrew menu. It's got a nice aesthetic to it, and watching the menu fill up with all these applications you load onto it is a cool experience. Every homebrew menu shows what kind of person you are in a way. The personalization of having custom apps on your Wii that someone else doesn't is really cool to me. I was the kind of person who wouldn't load the custom apps onto the Wii home screen itself. I kind of liked going into the dedicated homebrew app to access them all. This was back when I didn't have a proper PC, so homebrew was more of a cool alternative preference for emulation. I even recorded myself playing Wario Land 4 that way for this video. Originally, all the footage for each game in this video was just going to be recorded off my phone pointed at the TV. I'm still definitely interested in getting a capture card, but I think I'd want to get one that really captures the low fidelity of early SD TVs. Now hear me out here, you'd see this shit everywhere like 9 to 10 years ago on YouTube. Anyone who wanted to do Let's Plays and be somewhat professional bought a capture card, but since the standard for TVs at the time wasn't completely HD and capture devices for these consoles were relatively new, often the output really highlighted how low quality the conversion was. That might not be the real reason, but that's what I'm assuming. I'm not a genius on this shit, but it is interesting. It's a super specific thing and it isn't really an issue anymore, but I really dig the way these videos are captured. The best example I have for what I'm talking about is the Super Gaming Bros Scott Pilgrim playthrough. You can see the shakiness of the scan lines of the TV they're playing on, and it makes the pixels blend together with how shitty the bitrate is. But it exudes this unattainable charm that no other capture does. I swear, you can taste the RGB on this. I really wish more games had filters like this instead of that so-called CRT filter where they just add a really shitty looking scanline filter and a bend to the display. This shit just looks so tacky. I'd much rather have a filter that looks like this. It just looks and feels way more authentic. I played Mario 1 on FCEUX with this filter and it looked great. Hey, by the way, this Scott Pilgrim game is fucking awesome. Okay, anyway, changing titles from Wario's Treasure Hunt to Wario Cruise until finally settling on Virtual Boy Wario Land, this is another shitty name. Why didn't you just call it Wario Land 2? This game is 100% a sequel to Wario Land 1 in like every way. Why reserve the title for a game that changes the formula entirely from its predecessors? I know the game's on the Virtual Boy. It's on the front of the damn box. Why do you gotta remind me of my shitty purchase twice? At least it's better than what they called it in Japan. Bacharu Boy, Wario Rando Awazan no Hio. What am I, speaking another language? Virtual Boy Wario Land had Hiroji Kiyotake in the hot seat as director again, but this time a Hirofumi Matsuoka would co-direct with him. He's the guy I mentioned earlier. Matsuoka was heavily involved with the original Mario Land, but he's worked at Nintendo's R&D1 team since the 80s. He worked on games like the NES Metroid and Kid Icarus. The way that Metroid, Kid Icarus, and Wario all correlated to each other was always so interesting to me. There's a lot of comparisons you can draw between them that just make sense. Matsuoka also directed Mario Paint, so he definitely deserves some kind of award. I really wish I could commend all the guys on the staff, especially the programming team, because they really did a great job with this one. Again, there isn't a lot of information about the development of these games, and I don't fuck around with code, so I can't really say anything concrete about the work that went into this game underneath the hood.
Stop! Colin! Why would you do that? Why would you put water? Why the fuck would you do that?
All I can really give is a thumbs up and go, good job, guys. But it's a really big thumbs up, and I'm saying good job just slightly louder than average. In all honesty, if the Virtual Boy had full color capability, the way the 3D is conveyed might do a disservice to this game's style. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass here, but you could probably hack Virtual Boy games to have full color so that the 3D can be exemplified better, but I don't know. There's something fitting about only having one color. It's probably because it was a genuine limitation other consoles didn't have to worry about, so The sprite work and pseudo 3D were based around it. The only reason the Virtual Boy even has one car is because the dude behind the tech spent too much of his money on McDonald's Big Macs and couldn't afford a full color range of LEDs, so he could only get the red one. When Nintendo bought the tech off the guy and found time to start developing a console around it, Hiroshi Yamauchi told Gunpei Yokoi to hold back on Mario.
Gunpei Yokoi, if you don't know, is the creator of the original Game Boy, and who also, if you don't know, is dead. He died.
Mario 64 was in development, and they wanted that in the spotlight. At the time, a sequel to Mario Land was in development for the console, but after being told this, the project was retooled into a sequel to Wario Land. They decided against changing Wario's moveset too much, but they did change up his physics a lot. For one, his shoulder bash was given a tremendous speed boost and added momentum. Upon performing a shoulder bash, Wario gains tons of speed as afterimages trail behind him. In this speed state, you can immediately jump and carry that horizontal speed with you into the air. Upon landing or ending of the shoulder bash, your speed state is still carried over for a slight amount of time, signified by the afterimages. If you perform another shoulder bash in this window, you can maintain your speed continuously in a cycle. This allows you to string multiple shoulder bashes and jumps together in succession for maximum horizontal speed, and it feels great. This is unlike Wario Land 1, in which the shoulder bash didn't carry any momentum and only acted as a slight speed boost. The way it works in Virtual Boy Wario Land really complements the game's more horizontal level design. It's kinda like Sonic Advance 2, and that game rules! Wario has a normal run too now, which just allows him to move a bit faster on the ground than normal. It's a nice addition for the more calculated jumps, which require a specific amount of momentum. Since Wario's traveling up and out of a cave system he fell into, the end of every level is an elevator that takes you further and further up. I really like this format for level progression. I love the little mole tallying my progress, and I like that I stopped the elevator at a pit stop to grab more lives or gamble all my money away.
1, 2, 3, or 4. Everybody.
2, 4.
3. I'm gonna pick 1.
But I do wish there was some kind of world map. It would have been cool to see Wario climbing his way up through these caverns and finding himself in all these new precarious areas signified by a graphic on the map. Maybe every boss level could have ended with a demolition, causing the rest of the world to become explorable, or maybe just let me pick which level to explore first. When I picture what I want out of a map for this game, I imagine something structured mechanically and visually like that new alien hominid. That game's map leaves it up to the player to decide which levels they want to tackle, while visually conveying how difficult or lengthy they are just by their shape. That game's demo was pretty good, I liked it a lot. The elevator ain't bad. It's a simple screen and adds a lot to the already arcadey vibe of the game, which I'll talk about later, but something with a little more depth would have added to the world and would have definitely been appreciated. Then again, they probably didn't think about this too hard. I'm sure they'd rather be making this game on anything but a Pheropter. This game really lets you know what you're getting into. The elevator shows you how many levels you have left in the game as a whole. 14 levels, 4 of which are bosses. Surprise, surprise, this game's pretty damn short. Nice job, jackass. You just paid $40 for a 2-hour game in 1995! The game length is a point of criticism for a lot of people, but for me personally, I don't really mind it. It elevates the arcade vibes and makes the game super replayable. This game already has elements of a score attack game, with all your treasure tallying into a high score at the end, which affects your ending, and its length only encourages the player to learn more about it. If there's only 10 stages, I guess I better explore them as much as I can since I'm not going to be here long. It's fun, it reminds me a bit of Luigi's Mansion. Both games are pretty short and tally your score at the end and have treasure collection as a central mechanic. They're also both Nintendo games that are on failure consoles, but I guess you could say that about any two Nintendo games. They were also both composed by Kazumi Totaka, which I guess I should talk about here. The soundtrack is a bit unremarkable, but some standout tracks include the game's intro theme, which has this blaringly loud startup, and the 4th level theme, which uses the game's leitmotif in a really upbeat way. I won't spend too much time talking about the music because I bet you already know who Totaka is, but in case you don't, he composed for games like Mario Paint, Mario Land 2, and the original Animal Crossing. 2 of those are Matsuoka and Kiyotake games, and it makes me wonder how involved the directors of these games are in the process of choosing their staff. I guess that's more of a producer's job, but for all I know, they just pull names out of a hat every time or something, I don't know. Totaka's a pretty clear-cut guy from what I can tell. I was reading this interview with Koji Kondo and him, and Kondo is spouting a bunch of bullshit like, I think all humans have an inherent sense of rhythm, whether it be someone creating visuals or audio, and Totaka just goes, yes! Like, come on, man, you made the Wii Shop song! Being on the Virtual Boy, the devs really wanted to incorporate 3D in some way into the game, so they came up with the idea of being able to jump into the background and foreground off these springs, a mechanic they would sell back to you 20 years later with Kirby, and really hammer it in! It's on the fucking back of the box. They call it Deluxe Action. Deluxe Action my ass. What does Wario say on the back of the box? It says incredible 3D graphics and astounding levels because that's what it is. Yeah, it is scheming action. I'm fucking Wario! I tried to find any staff crossover between Kirby Triple Deluxe and Virtual Boy Wario Land to see if this was really just a rehash, but there's only one dude. Yasuo Inoue, printed artist for Virtual Boy Wario Land and manual editor for Triple Deluxe. Yeesh. Imagine being a fucking awesome artist at Nintendo that did art for these awesome Wario games, then they tell you to edit their shitty manuals no one will read. Damn, that fucking sucks. The background shenanigans often get called a gimmick, but the way it's done within the levels and boss fights really cement itself as a mechanic. We could sit here all day and argue the difference between a gimmick and a mechanic, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter. A mechanic can feel gimmicky, and a gimmick can be integrated so well that it's considered a mechanic. What matters is if it's fun and if it works, and it definitely does here. While the main mechanic consists of switching between platforms in the background and the foreground, obstacles can also swing back and forth from the two planes. Going into the background is often necessary for level completion, but can also house optional goodies like treasures or power-ups. There's this really cool part in the second level where you can see a fuck ton of blocks in the background, but there's no spring in your immediate vision that'll take you there. Where you're standing are these crates arranged in a peculiar way, and ground pounding in the middle of them reveals the spring that takes you over there. Later in the level, it's the same situation but without the strange arrangement, causing your instincts to kick in about these odd crates. Once you ground pound on them, it reveals the spring. The game is chock full of secret progression like that. It's my favorite shit ever, and the background mechanics only elevate what they can do with it. The levels are actually the best part of this game. They all offer something new, whether it be a new locale, mechanic, or enemy. Most levels are structured horizontally, which really complements Wario's speed, like I said before. The more vertical levels aren't bad, but definitely de-emphasize Wario's mobility. It really makes me wish he had a super jump, which was strangely taken out of this game. They could have kept it in and added the visual conveyance it needed to have more feedback, and I think it would have added a lot to these more scaling levels. It would have been interesting to include jumps that require the super jump, or maybe secrets that need the shoulder bash and super jump. I'm trying to say that there should be puzzles that require both the super jump and the shoulder bash. Maybe in your afterimage state, if you performed a super jump, it would send you higher than a normal one. I'm just spitballing here, but I personally think it would have made for some really unique time platforming. This game doesn't have a lot of tension-based platforming, but I'm imagining a level where lava's rising and you need to rush to the top, combining shoulder bash speed and well-timed super jumps to clear tight gaps. There's stuff like this in Wario Land 4, hell, it's the crux of the entire timed escape sections, but I think it could work great here too. It's like when you kill Ridley in Metroid and you have to climb up the level before it all explodes. Actually, Metroid and Wario share a lot of DNA. I didn't mention this before, but Hiroji Kiyotake actually designed Samus, and he also directed Metroid 2. These two franchises ended up diverging in completely different paths, but the early Metroid games share a lot with the early Wario games, most notably on the Game Boy Advance. Kiyotake also did work on Kid Icarus with Matsuoka. This means Wario's perfect, because Kid Icarus is also perfect. Like I said before, these stages are fucking great. I love this one where you can get flung into the background by these spatula platforms. This one where you jump on these tornadoes in the desert has a great style. And this one where you're exploring a fruit factory has a fun gimmick where you have to time dropping these watermelons into the background to progress. I really only ended up having issue with two levels, this haunted hallway one and the last level before the final boss. Since there's only 10 levels in this game, a lot of room is left over in making sure each level is as polished as it can be, except for these two. In level 9, you cross a bunch of similar looking hallways in this mansion haunted by ghosts. These hallways exist within both the foreground and the background, so it became very easy to get lost. The key to exit the level is hidden in a clock that doesn't expose its contents unless you wait around a little bit in the room, which is kinda bullshit. As for the final level in the game, everything is just super cluttered. Maybe it would look better on actual hardware, but this background is super busy and it makes it kind of disorienting to travel around, especially when the platforming is so tight here. It made it really difficult to see where I was going, and for the longest time I didn't see this fucking door here. The level itself isn't too hard, but I just wish the background was more subdued. Either way, even if these levels aren't the best, they're not infuriating. 8 out of 10 isn't a bad score, and even then I wouldn't consider these two levels to be horrible, so it's more like an 8.5 out of 10. Boss design in platformers is something I think gets overlooked a lot when critically analyzing the genre. Lots of work goes into that shit. Wario Land 1 took a lot of time in making sure its bosses had as much mechanical depth as possible, allowing the player to control the pace of the fight based on what they knew about the game, their moveset, and the boss's patterns and vulnerability. Virtual Boy Wario Land gives the pace control back to the bosses themselves, which is functional, but definitely a bit boring. The bosses are good fun, but they're definitely lacking in mechanical depth compared to the game's predecessor. The game has a pretty traditional boss structure. You hit them 3 times and they're done, but mixing that structure with the game's 3D mechanics helps out pacing issues. Before each boss, you have to trigger a switch to open the boss door. You do that by having a little mini-boss fight with this block thing. It gets more and more powerful with each boss you fight, and I really like the idea of fighting the same mini-boss before each main boss, but damn, I wish this thing was like a character. What if you fought Captain Syrup here? She could easily be her also going after the same treasure Wario is. The idea reminds me a bit of Proto Man, but it just kinda makes me wish it was that exactly. What if there was an entirely new character trying to stop Wario from progressing? My immediate idea is a character who's the hero of this cave setting. They'd be trying to stop Wario from defeating the boss so that they could do it themselves. They could be like the protagonist to the game you're not playing. In fact, this whole game sort of feels like Wario stumbled into the wrong game.
Here I go! Why,
He just sort of falls into this place. The setting isn't very Mario-like. The enemies are all completely new. There are no returning enemies from the first game, and none of these guys ever come back either. You could argue all the Wario Land games feel like this, but 4 out of 6 have returning characters and even continuous plot elements. The only games that don't are this one and Wario Land 4, both of which are coincidentally directed by the same guy. In any case, these mini-bosses are alright as they are. I just kinda wish they had a bit more character to them. It would add a lot to the setting to see its inhabitants. Well, you know, at least there's this mole dude. The first boss is this little homunculus crawling around, and his name is fucking Dinosaur Fish. Ah, jeez, you know, you couldn't have come up with like a better name? It's not just this guy either, it's all the fucking bosses. Sandfish, Tank and Operator, Demon Head, Jesus Christ. These aren't just unimaginative headcanon names either, these are official names upon request from Nintendo of America. This dude emailed the Nintendo of America just to get these names. I'd be disappointed as fuck. Like, let's call Bowser Bad Turtle. Ganondorf can be like threatening Arab. An Eggman, oh wait. Dino Fish sits in the background for a while before chucking the spike ball on his head towards you. Once he jumps into the foreground, he starts flinging the ball at you, leaving his bald head exposed for a really specific tight window. As far as I know, the only way to do damage to this guy is to jump on his bald head, but the window's almost too demanding for a first boss. I died a lot on this. It isn't too frustrating once you get it, but I wish you could shoulder bash him to knock him over or something and like proceed with a ground pound on his belly. The second boss, Sandfish, feels like a more fitting first boss despite the setting. You dodge his ceiling attack that destroys a part of the ground you're on, which ends up leaving him open for you to jump on. While I did have fun with these bosses, and I think they progress at a nice pace, I do wish they at least had multiple ways to damage them once they are vulnerable. The only boss with any kind of freedom is the Tank and Operator. Instead of stomping on his head to reveal his weak point, you can shoulder bash it. This allows you to stun lock him and get all 3 of your hits on his weak point super quickly. It's really the only boss that uses what you know about Wario's movement in a way that gives you control of the pace of the fight, but it's kinda too short in that way. Again, it's not a bad thing that the bosses have the control. It can make for some really tense fights, especially for the last boss, but I definitely prefer the structure of the previous game's bosses. Come Wario Land 4, I think they found a happy medium between the two boss structures that works as a perfect blend. Wario Land has a super heavy focus on bosses too, so it's equally as important to me that the bosses are good in tandem with the levels, even if they only make up less than half of the game. Demon Head was pretty fucking frustrating though. It's a pretty straightforward boss, but Jesus Christ, he has so much bullshit to him. He rarely leaves himself open for an attack, and the window to damage him is way stricter than it needs to be. You need to account for the time it takes Wario to get as high as he needs to hit his nose, but that's considering Demon Head is in the right position to begin with. Every time you hit him, he flies around the arena faster and faster, and it feels like it comes down to dumb luck whether or not you'll end up hitting him when you jump. On top of that, he has this shitty fire attack that lasts way too long and is barely avoidable with how much it trails. If I had the fucking super jump, this attack wouldn't be as much of a problem as it is. And to top it all off, he's the only boss in the game that goes against the 3-hit rule.
Oh, we're still not done.
If anything, I would have rather the previous 3 bosses go against that rule. They're pretty short fights, so I think increasing how many hits they can take would leave more time and room for the bosses to do more interesting things that the player would have to react to. I think giving Demon Head only 3 hits would make the balance between him having pace progression and my patience in fighting the boss more equal. As it is, beating Demon Head doesn't really feel satisfying, and I think it's because the boss has a really arbitrary difficulty. It sucks to see, especially since the levels in this game are fantastic. Before we finish up here, I want to talk a little bit about the promotional artwork. There are 4 dudes responsible for the printed artwork of this game. Noriyuki Sato, Norikatsu Furuta, Yusuke Nakano, and oh hey, Yasuo Inoue. A little weird these 2 pairs of dudes have really similar sounding names, but I guess that's Japan for you. All 4 of these dudes have pretty huge backgrounds as artists at Nintendo, and I learned a lot researching them, but before I get into that, holy shit! The art they did for this game is fucking fantastic. I really like this piece that shows the stage progression. Kinda reminds me a little bit of the NES Castlevania. If I were to remake this game, this would totally be the aesthetic of the map screen I was talking about earlier. I really don't know why Nintendo is so adamantly against 2D art styles for their games nowadays. Almost every in-house Nintendo game released in the past decade was 3D, whether they existed on two axes or not. I would love to see a new Wario Land game with hand-drawn 2D graphics in this exact style, or a Mario game with art direction from Yoichi Kotabe, or anything sprite-based for that matter. It feels like Nintendo sees sprite-based art direction to be discreetly retro, and don't see it as a valid direction for games anymore. It doesn't really make any sense. Sprite-based indie games sell like crazy on the Switch, so you'd think they'd try to cash in on that and try their hand at something like it again, but no. I mean, come on, Nintendo. Undertale doesn't look that ugly. With how many artists work at the company and how little of them actually end up directing their own games, it makes me wonder how much of an artist people like Miyamoto or Aonuma think of themselves. Maybe they see themselves as visionaries or something gay like that. Reggie is a visionary, you Japanese fucks. He's Haitian! This Noriyuki Sato guy actually did end up directing a game called Kiki Trick for the Wii though. I watched this video of Iwata and some guy who isn't Sato playing it, and it's like this weird sound matching game. I mean, okay, yeah, that's pretty unique. Inoue worked on the art for games like Mario Strikers, which everyone seems to really ruin their favorite pair of shorts over, and the manual for Kirby Triple Deluxe! The most standout of all these guys is probably Yusuke Nakano, who you probably know as the guy who photoshopped Steve onto the Smash Ultimate banner. Anyway, I'm only talking about these guys because they're all good artists who still work at the company, and they do a lot of good work for the creative conveyance of the games they work on. Having them all here, on Wario Land, speaks a lot of volume to how they started, where they ended up, and how Nintendo prioritizes their artists. And I'm not trying to say that Nintendo hates their artists or something really accusatory like that. I'm just saying that I want Nintendo to embrace their artists more. You got a lot of really talented guys here, give them the chance to make more of their own games. Hiroji Kiyotake started as an artist and he fucking made Wario for you. All in all though, Virtual Boy Wario Land is pretty fucking fantastic. This was the first Wario Land game to introduce an aspect of exploration beyond finding treasures to add to score, cementing exploration in the franchise's DNA. The next two games in the series would end up prioritizing puzzle solving and exploration instead of platforming, but I think this game strikes an almost perfect balance. Despite there being a key to collect every level, 10 treasures to find, and secret endings based on how much money you have, Virtual Boy Wario Land often leans towards being an action platformer rather than a puzzle exploration game. I can't call this game a puzzle platformer, but I also can't call it a pure platformer, so it really is a blend. I see this game as a completely necessary stepping stone between the fundamentals introduced in the first game and concepts introduced that were further evolved in Wario Land 4, which is a fucking awesome game. The mechanical concept of switching from the foreground to the background isn't anything revolutionary. Tons of games have done it before and after this one, but the way it's executed isn't overly annoying or underutilized. You can definitely call it a gimmick relative to the console, but it doesn't make it any less valid as an inclusion. When I think about it, they really missed out not remaking or porting this game to 3DS. Nintendo's always been fucking around with 3D technology, as early as the 90s, and they even went as far as to consider implementing it into the GameCube, but never really got it right until the 3DS. I think a game like this would be right at home on a handheld like that. It's super short, but super replayable. Why didn't they ever add it to the 3D Classics line or something? It's a little amazing to me that they're able to make such a good game on a Doom from the Start console. They really put passion into this project and it shows. The momentum-based physics do wonders in tandem with the level design, and the introductory exploration mechanics create a fertile soil for future games in the series to really shine. And they did it all on the fucking Virtual Boy! Okay, I'm gonna talk about Wario Land 2 and 3 now. These games are just okay. One of the most immediate things I noticed was the plot of the game, and no I didn't. I don't care. The change in Wario's physics as compared to the first two games didn't feel like an evolution of either form of movement. It feels like entirely new. Like, fucking worse in the context of a platformer. Wario's overall heavier and doesn't have a good sense of momentum anymore, and it's even worse than in the first game. He's slower, and the flow of movement feels a lot clunkier and jagged in a way. Perpetual motion doesn't exist in his base walking state. The camera also functions differently and is equally as jagged and clunky. There's a distinct lack of fluid or smooth motion with the way the camera operates, and it was super jarring on startup. I mean, I got used to it, but it was weird playing it for the first time. Wario got a nice resprite, but he's a lot bigger than before and takes up a decent chunk of the screen. His position on screen relative to the camera is entirely centered too, and while you'd think that would be ideal, it gets in the way more often than not. Compare this to Wario Land 1, where Wario is consistently set a little bit behind the center of the camera. This is done deliberately so that the player can see ahead of them as much as they need to. And the only time Wario approaches the middle of the screen are in the confined and claustrophobic areas where it really isn't imperative to see too far in front of you, or if you're going slow. It reminds me of Sonic Advance 2. It reminds me of semen.
The consistency is just like semen.
In Virtual Boy Wario Land, Wario is equally as consistent to the center of the screen, but that game's horizontal nature and wider resolution gave it reason for the camera to operate the way it does. Wario Land 2 starts out in a squished space, the camera's always focused on you, giving you extreme tunnel vision, and Wario's way bigger than before. So at this point I'm thinking, ah shit, these are like cardinal platformer sins. Alright, so what is this game? And, well, basically, Takehiko Hosokawa decided it would be a good idea to expand on the puzzle elements introduced in the last game to make this game a puzzle platformer. You know, real big emphasis on the puzzle. It's not even really that bad of an idea, to be honest. It even makes some sense. Previous to this, Hosokawa worked as a designer on Metroid 2. With Virtual Boy Wario Land introducing puzzle-like and exploration-based mechanics to the series, it probably made a lot of sense internally to take Wario Land in a more Metroid-Mario crossbreed direction. With proper execution, a more slower-paced puzzle and exploration-based Wario Land could really work. There's tons of ways you could do it. Wario Land 2's idea is to give the game a branching level structure, and okay, yeah, I guess that could work. If you like make all the levels enjoyable and like give enough motivation to the player to do all that, then yeah, why not? You know, like Kirby did it, so why not? Go ahead! Before we talk about all that though, let's talk a bit about this game's presentation. The evolution of the Game Boy Color leaves room for the artists to really express themselves, as the progression of the sprite work is the first step to Wario Land's definitive style, which peaks in Wario Land 4, specifically with his design. Every game in the series made by R&D1 from here on out improve on the visuals in a really natural and sensible way. Wario Land 3 specifically is an artistic feat. It looks great, especially for being on such a limited handheld. They finally understood what they wanted out of Wario's character by now too. He's as goofy and expressive as ever, and at this point he's cemented more as a misunderstood villain, incapable of anything malicious or truly evil. He's just greedy and comical, always finding himself in precarious positions. He probably invested a lot into XRP or something, or maybe he'd make his own pump and dump crypto scheme. Call it like Garlic Coin. Oh shit. Maybe Wario has some NFTs up for sale. Wario's characterization evolves even further in this direction in 4, so I sort of have to give credit to Wario Land 2 and 3 for planting the seed for 4's presentation to really thrive. To be honest with you, Wario Land 4 improves on everything introduced in 2 and 3, so it's a little bit hard not to bring up these 3 games together. I'm gonna try my hardest not to jump the gun though, so bear with me. Hey, speaking of Wario's characterization, is Wario German? Like, Mario and Luigi are Italian New Yorkers, but what's Wario supposed to be? Is he Italian too, or is he like German? He sounds German in the N64 games, but he isn't very caricaturistic like the Mario Bros. He isn't talking about sausages or calling me a Doomkopf, but still, it just feels really offensive somehow. Are Germans villainistic? Is that a stereotype? Oh, wait. Well, is he Italian then? He doesn't seem Italian, despite that apparently being his canonical nationality. I don't know where this notion came from, but when I was younger, I thought Wario was Mario and Luigi's cousin, so I figured he was Italian too. But his aggressive nature and speech patterns in the spin-offs make me think of him more as a Central European. He says "so ein Mist" in Mario Party, which is a German frustration phrase like "aw, darn it" or "damn it."
So ein Mist.
But it just sounds like he's saying "do, I missed," so that isn't any lead. Maybe he's one of those German Jews. No, not because he's like greedy or anything. I'm just like, this game definitely brought up a lot of good ideas to the table. It's the first game in the series to expand on Wario's moveset to its fullest, adding things like his ball state and the ability to ground pound without a power-up. It even has the super jump. This game also introduced transformations, a staple of the series beyond this point. Which some kind of freak had to come up with. So, which one of you was it? I think they're canonically called conditions or reactions or some shit, but that's stupid, so I'm gonna call them transformations. I did some research and I went through a bunch of 4chan threads, and yeah, people credit Wario for their interest in this. I mean, I'm not trying to judge, but who the hell was playing Wario Land 2 on their Game Boy Color and got hard when Wario turned flat? It made me soft. It's like the worst transformation in the game, too. They definitely didn't do this on purpose. You know, unless they did. I don't know. What are old Japanese game artists even into? Does that shit even reflect on their work at all? You think Kiyotake was like Osamu Tezuka and had a secret fetish art stash lying around? I mean, Wario's already a self-insert, so maybe this is indicative of that. Hey, wait, he totally is into transformation. He turned Metroid into a girl! What the fuck, man? Hey, anyway, do all these great ideas really matter if they aren't implemented well? I mean, I don't mean in the context of just this game, I mean every game. It's kind of a complicated question to answer, and there's lots of subjective aspects to take into account. And the question is a little unfair in reality. It calls into attention an even greater question in relation. How do you think aspects of video game discussion should be tackled? I know we were just talking about objectification and status change fetishes like just a minute ago, but hear me out here. When I was talking about Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land, I praised both of their presentation and gameplay factors. Every point of critique was shot towards what they decided not to do, whether it be aspect of Wario Land 1's presentation or lack of expansion of the physics in Virtual Boy Wario Land. I'm about to talk about the complete opposite, critique shot towards what they did decide to do. I really want this to be an open discussion portion, so I really don't want to make it seem like I'm telling you how to feel here. I want to make this distinction specifically because I feel like a lot of reviewers go on track to talk about something like this, but boil it down to some sort of proposed essential that they just take as the be-all end-all. This school of thinking isn't wrong, but I feel like it definitely suppresses discussion in a way. To me, you can boil down game discussion into two aspects, presentation and gameplay. They include things you'd expect from their definition, but also carry two very other important characteristics to them. Ambition and vision, included in both presentation and gameplay. If you give a shit about video games at all, I shouldn't have to explain how these two aspects affect each other directly. If you were to ask me the question, which is more important to you, presentation or gameplay, not too long ago I would have replied with something like, if your game looks nice but plays like shit, I won't want to play it, I just want to think about it or look at it. Or, if your game plays nice but looks like shit, you're missing a core aspect that makes me want to keep playing. While both of these statements have validity and are true in ways, I think they implicate that merit to playing your game is locked behind the balancing act of these two aspects, which isn't very fair. Game discussion is often locked to a set, talking about games as the sum of their parts. However, I've lately been distancing myself from this notion more and more, and started to see games more as their individual pieces brought together to make what they are, the pieces to its sum. Games are an art form and should be treated as such, so I'm hard-pressed to put priority in one of the two aspects over another. This stuff has to be treated equally when critically analyzing a game. Obviously, in a casual conversation, I can easily reprimand a game for playing or looking like shit. It doesn't matter. I can say I hate Celeste all I want, but in a format like this, that rhetoric has no validity. I definitely want to make a video on this topic in the future that goes deeper into what I mean, but that's gonna have to be after I make a video on Nichijou. And yours say Yatsura. And No More Heroes, and Scott Pilgrim, and the Storybook games, and Shenmue and Jet Set Radio, so it's gonna be a while. I only bring this up in relation to Wario Land 2 and 3 because I didn't really like these games, and like I mentioned before, I have to critique what they are doing inversely to what they aren't. If I just talked about how shit these games felt to play and didn't mention any of the ambition or vision behind the project, I'd be implicating that they aren't worth your time. Which isn't true, by the way. You should definitely check these games out if they're of any interest to you. Respect is due when it comes to this shit. I couldn't have come up with Wario, are you kidding me? All games are worth the experience if they offer some new thinking within you. There's nothing wrong with judging something as a consumer, but just because a game plays badly or has bad execution of a good idea doesn't mean the game as a whole is bad, and the same goes for artistic faults. There's so many other aspects of games to talk and think about, and that's what makes the medium so interesting to study. I think Wario Land 2 and 3 act as good catalysts for this discussion, but again, that's only because I didn't like them. Usually shit like this comes up when you're talking about Sonic. Like I mentioned before, this game introduced the transformation mechanic to the series. Props to this game because this idea is really great. Since this game doesn't have a live system and getting hit only costs a few coins, particular enemies will transform Wario into a different state when hit. As good of an idea as this is, I really wish there was some extra conveyance to what enemies transformed you and which did nothing. This is a problem even in Wario Land 4. I really wish they had some kind of purple aura around them or a special outline that indicated they transform you. There were a lot of times where I was caught off guard at an enemy transforming me, and I guess that's the point, but it feels really arbitrary. It just sort of exists as a beginner's trap right now and puts gameplay flow at a halt. I wouldn't have to learn what enemies transform me and which don't if there was just a graphic assigned to them. And yeah, it doesn't matter now since I know which ones do since I've played it, but it's a little odd. It makes the player confused towards enemies, if anything. Instead of getting excited when I see an enemy thinking it might transform me, I just get hesitant because it could easily just take coins off me. Like, ooh, that one's gonna transform me, I wonder what the transformation is, not, will that one transform me?
Is that beer?
Yeah.
Something that also soured me on the way this game handled transformations was its introduction. The first enemy that transforms you turns you into this pancake Wario, and in this state your jump height is decreased, but your fall has a very specific arc to it. There's a bunch of coins you can only get to using this transformation, and considering this is the third level in the game, you think they wouldn't make the jump so difficult. It's supposed to be like an easy introduction to how the transformations work, right? Well, Jesus Christ, it took me 30 tries to get right! It isn't necessary to complete the level at all, but there's a similar part in Wario Land 3 that is required to beat the level, and it's fucking worse! I can't tell if it's because of the way the transformation controls, the stage structure, or both, but these sections fucking sucked. Flat Wario comes back in Wario Land 4, but he's seldom used for any difficult progression challenges. I don't know why they made the transformations work this way. They all hinder Wario's progression instead of helping him. It's really bizarre. I get that's like the quirk of them, but the transformations in Wario Land 4 also drastically change or hinder Wario's movement, but the levels are designed in tandem with those changes. In 2 and 3, you move like shit and the level doesn't compensate for it at all. It's weird too, because almost all the transformations work this way. The only two I would say don't are Puffy Wario and Fire Wario. Puffy Wario makes you perpetually float upwards, allowing you to get into higher portions of the level. And Fire Wario is mostly used for gated progression puzzles, since you can only break the fire blocks needed to move further in the level when you're in this state. Even if these two transformations aren't as bad as the rest, which I'll get into in a second, they're definitely still underutilized. Puffy and Fire Wario are expanded on in unique ways come Wario Land 4, so it's not like it's their concepts that make them bad. It really is just how they're executed. I really like that Fire Wario becomes more of a reaction-based challenge in 4, forcing you to rush to the blocks you need to destroy while precisely platforming with a hindered moveset. There isn't much of this in 2 and 3 at all. Here's a quick rundown of what I mean when I say the transformations hinder Wario. Fat Wario makes you really slow and heavy, but you can break denser blocks with your jump, which they only use for more gated progression puzzles. Bouncy Wario can only bounce upward, and the only time it's used for anything other than a bonus is to set you back and waste your time. There's also Drunk Wario. He has a tumbling momentum to his walk, and he'll also change your direction at will. This could be used for a multitude of interesting platforming challenges, but instead the enemies that turn you drunk are often there for you to avoid. You know, there's no bonuses to getting drunk at all, so why even bother drinking? Nothing good comes from drinking alcohol. Maybe the way this transformation was implemented was intentional. I'm trying to teach kids that alcohol dependency is a bad thing. Kids won't drink if it makes them act like Wario. It's really odd to me that they were so insistent on this kind of design. It's prevalent all the way to the final level. Like, here, you're supposed to platform your way to the next room, but these penguins that make Wario drunk are in your way. Your punishment for falling down is getting transformed, and you have to embarrassingly walk towards the water to untransform and restart the process all over again. It's pretty useless level design, especially for the final level. It would have been way cooler if you were forced to transform, and the platforms in front of you were tailored to your new movement. That way, a unique challenge that couldn't be offered to the player before can be offered to them here. Maybe you could structure it vertically, have the pool of water that cleanses Wario at the top, and start the camera there and pan it down to Wario's actual position at the bottom. The player could recognize what they need to do with their new uncomfortable moveset to get to the top, and it would make the platforming satisfying. There actually is level design like this in this game in the form of the ball sections, which were actually pretty nice. The platforming in those sections are extremely reactionary and require a lot of quick input reflexes, which I love a lot in action platformers. There aren't too many ball sections in Wario Land 2, but 3 makes up for it by putting more in. As most of the transformation sections are now, they just sort of exist to slow you down and set you back. I should be excited to transform, not dread its necessity. I was watching reviews of this game on YouTube, and a lot of them said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, I really like the way the transformations hinder Wario in this game and set him back," and they fucking meant it. Now what the fuck? Are you that pressed to say something positive about this game that you just have to spin the things that suck about it? That shit's like if I captured a bullet bill in Mario Odyssey and it just auto-flew me to the beginning of the level and I went, "Oh, yes!"
And it almost makes this game play more like a Kirby game than a Mario game.
This shit isn't like Kirby at all! I transform in Kirby and kick ass while I breeze through the level with cool new tricks and attacks. I touch an enemy in this game and become super fat. My fucking speed value is set to like -1. Gotta wait like 30 years for the game to become fun again! The levels in Wario Land 2 also take a different direction, barring the levels with a focus on transformations. I guess this is where you'd say the puzzle elements of this game really shine, but it's less puzzle-orientated and more exploration-based. When starting a level, the game will always tell you a goal in mind. It's basically a clear condition. In the beginning of the game, you're meant to find Wario's faucet and alarm clock and turn both off. This first bit of the game takes place in Wario's mansion, and in hindsight, I really like the level's look and feel. The walls have a bunch of pictures of Wario, and some sections even have his face carved in with stone. I really love how these look. You can definitely tell it's based off of whatever 3D model they had of him at the time. It's super charming. There's a multitude of walls in this level you can break open with your shoulder bash to collect the treasures inside, and I really love the implication of Wario's character here. He hides all his gold inside of walls so that no one else can get to it but him. I love that. It's a pretty small detail, but one that implies a lot about his character in a really fun way. This level's really the only one reminiscent of the game's predecessors, since there's a lot of pretty solid platforming here too. There's a part where you need to time your jumps off these drifting pieces of furniture in the water to make it across, but falling in the water could lead to a discovery of a secret area. This first level does a pretty great job of introducing what the gameplay flow is supposedly going to be like. Solid platforming, exploration beyond the progression's path, and clear conditions that ask you to explore your surroundings to find the item of interest. Yeah? Well, forget it, because it's a lie. While the structure of the levels do end up differing, with there being more vertical scaling levels, it quickly devolves into just finding the exit or beating the boss.
My voice cracks a lot.
I was really hoping the rest of the game would have a similar level structure with its goal conditions, but in my playthrough I didn't see too many. There was this one where I had to return this hen back to her nest, but other than that they were all mundane. My guess would be that traveling down different level paths would give you more varied level goals, which I definitely would have liked to see more of. But do you think I feel the need to care enough to replay through the game to see these different conditions?
How the fuck you think I feel?
Yeah, so this game has differing level paths. Like I mentioned before, it sort of works like Kirby, specifically Amazing Mirror. Think this, but each square is a full level you play, and finding treasures works like Great Cave Offensive. The only issue with this is that as a result of the game's already lackluster level design, I really don't feel any motivation to seek out alternative exits to see any of the other levels, even if they are better. If the bulk of your game is already not fun to play, I'm not going to feel inclined to play through the rest of it just to see if it gets any better. This problem is accentuated further since the game's most obvious level path makes the experience streamlined enough to where it doesn't overstay its welcome. I don't want to play this shit any longer than I already have to, I'm fatigued! The branching level structure isn't a bad idea at all, but when the gameplay presented here already isn't that great, I don't feel the need to squeeze the game dry of all it has. I don't want to sit through more shitty transformations and clunky bosses more than I already have to. You know, it's just not in my busy schedule, okay? Hey, speaking of bosses, let's talk about that. Since you can't die by getting hurt in this game, getting hit by a boss will more often than not send you directly upward. After getting blasted up, you land on these platforms above the arena, where you have to walk out of the door and redo platforming to get back to the boss. This is infuriating! I can't learn shit about the boss when if I make one mistake, I have to do a fucking gay walk of shame back to the arena and start the boss all over again. It's so strange, especially considering the previous two games' really solid boss design and some of the great ones here. Virtual Boy Wario Land's bosses were less than ideal, but they at least didn't push the reset button on my system for brushing pixels with them, god damn! There's this cool bunny boss who's constantly trying to throw you into this basketball hoop to gain points against you, and it reminded me of the bull boss in the first game. You get so fed up with the boss, you end up wanting to give him a taste of his own medicine, which ends up being what works. He's the only boss that allowed me to make a mistake, and I learned from it, making the boss more enjoyable. They do this shit all the way up to the end of the game. The final boss I ended up fighting operated the same way. This was specifically enraging because that boss sucks my cock! Captain Syrup sits at the top of the screen in this knockoff Eggmobile, rocking from left to right. Below you is a bed of lava, shooting spires up in succession to burn your ass and send you up to restart. Meanwhile, Syrup is chucking enemies at you that if you fail to catch can get burned by the fire, making them impossible to pick up. If you get hit by the burned enemy, you're more than likely to get knocked back into a spire, sending you straight up to reset again. You're supposed to throw the enemies back at Syrup for damage, but with all these variables and things to keep track of, it's unsatisfying and frustrating to pull off. Yeah, it makes the boss tense, but it doesn't even end there. She'll eventually close off her weakness and start throwing bombs at you that send shockwaves of fire that also shoot you up in combination with the lava spires. I figured you were supposed to throw the bombs above her and onto her head, you know, her only exposed spot, but no, of course not. You're supposed to throw the bombs at the lava spires, timed perfectly with Syrup's position to even have a chance of doing damage to her in this phase. This is conveyed horribly, and it took more time for me to figure out how to even do damage to her than it did beating Demon Head in the last game. Her hitbox is completely fucked, too, so sometimes the lava would clearly touch her, but it wouldn't do shit for damage. Of course, though, if you even graze the lava or a bomb blast, you're sent directly up and have to do this fucking walk back to the arena, where her health is reset! It's a completely patient yet fucked boss fight. I get that it's supposed to be hard, but this is just stupid. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to just chuck the bombs back at her for damage. It would have been the perfect difficulty if that were the case. The spires are already hard to dodge as is. Why are you making me juggle 18 different things just to beat a boss? Again, there might be more cool bosses on the different paths, but there's no way in hell I'm playing more shitty levels just for the chance of more cool bosses. They might just all be as bad as the final boss. Fuck if I know. And fuck if I care. Maybe it isn't right for me to critique areas of the game I haven't played, and maybe it makes my opinion invalid, but in this specific situation, I don't care! If what's being presented to me is the standard the game operates at, and then I'm offered more of that shitty standard, fuck that! I'm turning the game off.
Turning the game off.
Just like the games that came before it, this game has a treasure system. There's collectibles attached to each level, and with the whole branching level structure, there's a ton of MacGuffins to grab for completion. Unlike its predecessors, however, you aren't graded at the end for how much treasure you collected. The different endings are separated through whichever path you end up taking, and if you ended up going for 100% completion.
What the fuck?
What?
Huh?
There's different...
No!
Fundamentally, a system like this could function pretty well, but the way it works in tandem with the damage system seems completely counterintuitive. When you get hit in this game, you lose coins, but like I said before, you aren't graded at the end of the game for how many you have, like in the previous entries. Coins in this game are exclusively used on tries for minigames that give you completion collectibles. If they were used in the same way as the previous games in tandem with this new system, it might have added a little more at stake for the boss fights. As they are now, there's no reason to lose coins when you get hit in this game. Because you can't die and there's no score-based ending, there would be no point in the bosses making you lose coins. All it really does is push you further back from completion, if anything. So they opt for this redo system for the bosses, which makes sense on paper, but if you ask me, allowing the bosses to hit you normally and force you to lose coins would add a lot of tension to messing up. As it is now, coins have no value to me because they only serve as a means for achieving 100% completion, something I don't care about anyway since it's presented as unsatisfying in the first place. If they implemented a treasure-based ending mechanic to this game, it would push me to explore for more coins so I can have an excess to spend on both minigames for collectibles and gambling while also having enough for a good ending. Encouraging the player to explore like this would also possibly result in them stumbling on an alternate exit, which could be a really cool first-time discovery. It would add a sufficient amount of depth lacking in the earlier game's treasure-based ending mechanics, even if this new structure I'm imposing is strict. Wario Land 2 has an overabundance of coins to begin with, so more things that add to their value seem like a natural extension of their use case. This coin shit and getting hit having no punishment affects a lot of facets of the game I don't think the designers were anticipating, like the bosses or player motivation, and it's a bit of a shame. Wario Land 2 could have been a great evolution of ideas introduced in the first two games, but instead decides to reinvent to a fault. This game is odd in the fact that it feels like it's pretending to be puzzle-orientated, but most of the puzzles are just there to gate your progression, not test your skill or problem-solving in any meaningful way. Usually, puzzles in games exist to block you off from going forward, of course, but the gratification of completing said puzzle shouldn't be, "Aw, finally I can go forward." It should be, "Aw, what a great fucking puzzle!" I should feel like Einstein after completing a puzzle in a game.
My God, it's Albert Einstein! It's Albert Einstein! Oh my God, it's Albert Einstein!
In Wario Land 2, it's either that you can't go forward here because you aren't transformed, or being transformed will make this platforming more difficult, so it's something you want to avoid. I don't know if I'd really call those puzzles. They're more like paying fucking troll tolls. It's not fun. I don't scratch my brain at what I'm supposed to do. All the answer to the puzzles are completely one note. In this way, the game is really tugging back and forth on whether or not it wants to be a puzzle platformer or an action platformer. It isn't mixing concepts of both genres in any interesting ways like Virtual Boy Wario Land did, but it doesn't want to commit to prioritizing one or the other either. The game doesn't put enough thought into its puzzles, and because it's also juggling being an action game, its platforming sections feel substandard. I really don't want to convey that this game isn't worth your time, because maybe it would totally be up your alley. Maybe you'd love the exploration aspect of finding the different level paths, the way the transformations function, the strict bosses, or be more interested to see more of the game. But as it stands, the way all those ideas are executed just don't do it for me, especially taking into consideration what they did beforehand in the previous games. I can't say they're bad ideas just because they were executed poorly, and I can really respect this game's vision for the future of Wario games, but it's just too rough around the edges for me to enjoy. Presentation-wise, it's subpar too, minus the character sprites. The music is forgettable, the set pieces are uninteresting, and the rare instances where I enjoy the locales I'm in are just that, rare. That bit about the music isn't to knock the composer or anything. Her name's Kazuo Ishikawa, and she's done a good bit of great work for Nintendo. She composed the music for Link's Awakening, which that game's whole deal is about making music, so. She also did work on the sound effects for Earthbound, which means there's a good chance she concocted one of these sounds. There really was some great talent working on this game, but the gameplay is just too much of a grab bag of great ideas done poorly or good ideas executed infrequently well. But I would still call this a good game. You can tell they really tried and wanted to make something separate from the previous experience while setting up a potential sequel for more than just a Mario spinoff. It has this really specific aura to me, like they knew that it didn't matter if things didn't end up too well because they always had the chance to improve on the ideas they played with. And you know, I can kinda respect it for that. So, is Wario Land 2 bad, taking into consideration my soapbox speech about game attributes? No, I don't think so. Is there less positive reaction to chew on than the previous titles in terms of immediate feedback like gameplay? I mean, that's really where Wario Land 2 and even 3 falter. They're stepping stones that offer just enough individuality to set them apart from the other games that surround them, but that individuality is what make up their faults. That doesn't mean they should be discredited in... That doesn't mean they should be discredited in discussion either. Oh my god. To be honest with you, I really don't want to talk about this game at all. I didn't hit record the last time I played Wario Land 3, so I apologize if I end up reusing footage or taking footage from other sources or just don't have enough footage to properly convey what I'm talking about here. Thankfully, there isn't too much to talk about in terms of Wario Land 3, despite the changes they made in both the gameplay and presentation departments, so this bit of the video might be a bit short anyway. I also didn't beat the game either. Wario Land 3 ended up being close to my least favorite in the entire series, which really baffled me considering how often I see people citing it as their favorite. The game had a development cycle of about 2 years and has the same staff crossover barring a few new faces on the programming team. They definitely had a lot of time and room to learn from the previous game and expand on what was introduced in it in a way that's innovative, and, you know, in that way I think they definitely succeeded. They take the branching level structure from 2 and smooth it out to function like a world map, but there's still reason to replay through each level. Every stage has 4 colored chests that have goodies for Wario to find, and that makes the levels especially designed around exploration in this one. Each chest is in a different location in every level that requires different abilities to even reach sometimes. Yeah, you get fucking abilities in this game. You start out exclusively with the jump and shoulder bash, but Wario can't ground pound, super jump, or even swim or grab enemies in the beginning of the game. You have to find and unlock the rest of your moveset through finding the chests that hold them, allowing you to progress further in other areas of the game that you couldn't before.
I can ground pound now.
They really went hard on the Metroid Mario crossbreed idea, since this game is essentially a platformer Metroidvania. The only difference is that instead of the levels being interconnected through one big world, they're delegated to being their own playgrounds you can select on a world map. It's literally Mario meets Metroid. As much as I'm not a fan of this idea, I think there's some aspects of it that have solid execution, especially since the game lets you know which levels you can progress in. They do this with these little arrow graphics on the level icon, and it's really helpful. Speaking of the graphics, the assets in this game are kind of fucking awesome. I especially like this pause screen. The save icon has this super stylistic feel to its lettering, and the gradient in the background is really pleasing to the eye. Everything on this screen is structured really well too. You have all the basic functions of a pause screen up here, and it leaves room on the bottom of the screen to show all your stats for the level you're in. It's shit you don't really think about now, but if they structured the screen in any other way, it would have been compromising in terms of where these stats could have gone. It would have been all the more annoying to click on an icon to send myself to another screen just to track my progress. The golf minigame screen is equally as nice to look at. I'm a real sucker for gradient dithering like that, especially with these colors. Is golf, like, an integral part of Wario's character? Did he go out golfing with Mario in, like, NES Open? Cause this game sure does love to make me golf with Wario! Look at this! Look at this! Oh my god, look at this! They do a similar coloring technique on the assets in Wario Land 4, specifically with the time-up graphic, but it's particularly of note here because it's on the Game Boy Color. You don't really see a lot of effects like that on the original Game Boy, so the expanded color palette really did a lot for the artistic conveyance of games, like I said before. There are some fucking great-looking games on the Game Boy Color, by the way. Donkey Kong Country, Mario Golf, Mega Man Extreme, and Snoopy Tennis come to mind. It's pretty cool to note how great all these games can look, even on such limited hardware. Wario Land 3 is a pretty significant improvement from 2 in this department, too. The tile sets are of note, they're a really stark upgrade. I mean, look at the fucking pause screen between Wario Land 2 and 3. Granted, this screen doesn't need anything fancy to it since there's no need for progression stats, but what the fuck kind of asset is this?
You look ridiculous.
I see a lot of people call this game and other Metroidvanias like it non-linear, and it's like, I guess you could say that. People call games like Super Metroid or Link to the Past non-linear, and I guess by definition, the ability to choose the order of progression in games is a non-linear experience, but I still end up doing the same shit, it's just in a different order. I'm still required to beat all the levels, it's not like I can skip any. When I think of something non-linear, I think of like Breath of the Wild or Mario 64. I can do all this shit in those games in any order or just skip it entirely if I want. I'm hard-pressed to say a platformer like Wario Land is non-linear at all. Bowser's Castle and Mario World is more non-linear than this shit. You don't gotta go through all the doors in that level, you can just skip some. I fucking wish I could skip levels in this game. Wario Land 3 has a day-night cycle, meaning the level layouts will change depending on whether or not it's daytime or nighttime in the game, which allows players to discover different paths not previously available depending on the time of day. The time cycles through every time you beat a level. If it's day, it'll turn to night and vice versa. I initially thought it was just an aesthetic thing, something to give the maps more flavor. It might have been a cool addition if that were the case, since it would address the issues I had with Wario Land 1's world map, but it's a game mechanic in this game, an absolute necessity. There's almost no way to know which levels are going to have different paths during the cycle shift unless the game literally spells it out for me, like in this level with these sun and moon symbols. It's like fake depth, which, is a problem most Metroidvanias have anyway. As it works now, the day-night cycle only exists to pad out the game and block your progression flow from being streamlined and free, to make the length of the game artificially longer. It might have just been a better decision to have all the paths open all at once and allow the player to choose which to go through at their own will, instead of arbitrarily mandating when and where the player can go to specific areas. But maybe this is more of a problem with the way levels are strung together in the form of a world map, rather than the day-night cycle itself. This issue is accentuated with the way they tell the player which level has a path open, too. I appreciate the arrows assigned to the levels telling me where to go, but because you do tell me where to go, I feel completely disengaged from the proposed depth of progression you have going on. If you didn't tell me where to go, the game would be padded out to be way longer because I'd get lost more, but since you do tell me where to go, there's no engagement. Wario Land 3 takes place in this dimension inside of a music box, and you'd think that they use that as an excuse to have some fantastical levels, but it's just boring villages and caves again. I was actually really interested to see what kind of setting the game would take place in at the start, since the first thing that greets you is this giant, big-lipped face, but unfortunately it's pretty stock standard. And they kind of followed the same idea they did for the setting in Virtual Boy Wario Land, as we're taking the character away from the world we already know to put him somewhere completely new. The difference is, in that game, the world is entirely underground, giving the game a motif to follow that's intriguing. In this game, we're just in some world that looks no different to Wario's own. The fact that it's in a music box is a footnote, if anything. I really wish there was more of a point to it being what it is. You collect these weird trinkets that can affect the world, but it's just surface level shit that opens paths for you to progress. Maybe you could have a couple levels where you explore the different compartments and mechanics of the music box instead of just the same cave 5 times over. What if the music box was broken and its inhabitants wanted to suck in a hero from the outside world to help fix it? Maybe they were hoping for someone like Mario, but instead get this mustard fuck. I don't know, anything to make me care about the plot and setting in a platformer aside from how it looks. Please, just make me interested. I know they were really hoping taking aspects of Mario and mixing them with Metroid would make the experience more interesting, but it just kind of bogs the game down. I mean, it's not like having an interconnected world-based Metroidvania was an impossibility on the Game Boy. The only reason I can think of for why the game has a world map is to make it more like Mario, which they clearly wanted to do. I feel like they maybe took the worst attributes to mix, too, because this kind of game can be done well. In fact, it was. If you want to play a cool platformer Metroidvania with an interconnected world and elements of action platformers that also looks nice, play Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. Or just play all the Shantae games. They're not all great, but you'll probably like them more than this game. To be honest, all this just makes me really glad they dropped this genre for this series after this game. The idea of compartmentalized playgrounds that you revisit after unlocking abilities that grant you to do more things isn't a bad one. They do that shit in fucking Mario 64, but I just don't think it works with this weird DNA mixture of a game. Hey, the transformations are still here. They still suck. Well, most of them anyway. The new transformation, Vampire Wario, I think is executed pretty nicely. As Vampire Wario, you can turn into a bat and fly around to cross to different paths that normal Wario couldn't, but touching water or light will turn you back to normal. Every Vampire Wario section I played laid out the challenge in front of you before you transformed, giving the player ample time to plan out how to tackle the obstacle. Like in this room, the lights are clearly displayed in front of you before you transform, or here with the water dripping. It's how every transformation ought to work, on top of giving the player an interesting platforming or maneuvering challenge to attempt with their new moveset. Since the moveset of Vampire Wario isn't too complex anyway, most of his sections come down to just dodging things that'll turn you back to normal, but it's not like the mechanic is requiring any kind of intense depth to be engaging. It works on its own, unlike the rest of the transformations, which are unchanged from 2. If anything, like I said before, the transformation sections in this game are worse due to the game's exacerbated level design issues on account of the increased scope. Any new ideas presented or lessons learned from Wario Land 2 and progression to 3 only exist to accentuate the issues that already existed. On paper, Wario Land 3 is supposed to take the direction introduced in 2 and polish it out to make it a better experience, but it just falls flat. The bosses function the same way with a few exceptions, despite these exceptions being too easy. The music is equally as grating, despite the positive changes in presentation. The punishment padding is worse than before due to the lack of changes in the transformation system, and all things unique to the game are extremely frustrating, mandatory aspects with easy alternative design opportunities that they just said fuck it with. Like, this shitty golf minigame you have to play over and over to progress doesn't need to be here, and neither does the day-night cycle. Also, I didn't have fun playing it, so that means it's bad. I can definitely see the appeal of a game like this, especially with how it's structured to be a long-form experience, but I just can't shake the feeling they were still worried its action platforming elements were going to be downplayed because of the rest of their new ideas. It's like they're compensating the entire time. There's fits of genius in Wario Land 3 that mix action platforming with exploration gameplay really well. Like these ball sections where you have to choose a path to go down, taking you to different areas of the level, but it pushes hard on its Metroid DNA to the point where it's unenjoyable. Maybe if I come back to the game later, I'll feel a lot different about it. The game is definitely designed to make repeated playthroughs more leisurely due to the player's knowledge, but as is, I think I hate this game. Funny coming from someone who loves playing games that are supposed to be a rough first playthrough and didn't even beat this one, but look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't have the patience, and you know, I don't have to explain anything. I could have just not talked about Wario Land 3 and no one would have cared. I just want to talk about Wario Land 4. I don't know how to make being upset with the game entertaining, okay? Fuck! Hey, you ever play these games though? These aren't Wario Land games, but I figured I've at least mentioned every other Wario game at this point, so why not make this video a one-stop shop for all things Wario? Oh well, I guess I haven't mentioned Master of Disguise yet. Did you know Wario loves bombs? He can't get enough of them! I don't know where this characteristic came from, but the early Wario games always has him fucking around with explosives. Maybe it comes from him being German and evil, but for whatever reason, they thought Wario should be synonymous with bombs. Do you like Bomberman? I sure do. At least I think I do. I think I should. I had Bomberman Jetters as a kid on my GameCube, and I played the fuck out of that. It has this cool single-player campaign and a really expansive battle mode with a ton of stuff in it, and it also has these fucking guys. I'm sure if I played the game now, I'd find a lot to complain about it, especially in terms of the single-player stuff since it doesn't look too fun to play, but I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. It makes me want to play more Bomberman games. I know a lot of people like Bomberman 64, and every YTP MVer has a hard-on for Redial from Bomberman Hero, so I'd really love to check out the series one day. It'll give me a chance to gush about how much I love the composer of a majority of the games, Jun Chikuma. She did those badass Arabian tracks on Sonic and the Secret Rings on top of the drum and bass in Bomberman Hero. She's a super interesting composer I suggest checking out. I'm only bringing this up because Wario Blast is a crossover game between Wario and Bomberman. And by crossover game, I mean absolute reskin. I mean, it's still cool though. I really like the art direction here with these transition screens, and some of this music is pretty damn good for a Game Boy game. There's also Wario's Woods, which is like this weird puzzle game I can't get behind. Nintendo keeps fucking re-releasing this game through different means, and I always end up trying to play it, but I'm just so god-awful at it. And I'm the puzzle guy. I like Puyo Puyo. I play pieces on SNES. Wario World is really the only game out of this bunch I can consider some kind of successor to Wario Land. It came out 2 years after Wario Land 4, and I'm guessing Nintendo asked Treasure to make their interpretation of what a 3D Wario Land would play like. I like the progression of the name Land to World that Nintendo does. It's a cute little trend they follow, even with such a weird game like this. I haven't played this game all the way through, but like I said, it was developed by Treasure. The director is a Koichi Kimura, who also directed Stretch Panic. Reading reviews of Wario World, and with my own previous knowledge of the games he's worked on, it seems like he consistently makes almost cool games in the eyes of the general consumer. Which, you know, means I'd probably love all his games. He was also the producer on Silhouette Mirage, which is a pretty neat game. The other director on this game is Hitoshi Yamagamagami, this Nintendo dude who does a lot of modern production work. Wario World was actually the last game he directed hands-on, falling into consistent production work after. Anyway, Wario World's cool. It's interesting to note that they actually brought in John Cena and the Hulk to mocap some of Wario's wrestling moves in the game, but other than that, I don't really know what to say about it since I haven't played it too much. And I did like flinging enemies around and listening to Wario scream at them. I actually didn't play any of these games in preparation for this video. I just kind of wanted to include this part as a nice little pace breaker before... Hey, what's up with daylight savings? It's like fucking 6 PM and I can't see shit outside. What's the point of this shit anyway? Put the clocks forward a few hours? I get a few more minutes of sleep? I get to dream about bullshit a little longer, oh boy! I don't want to do that shit. No one wants to do that shit. I want to get up and at 'em. I want to enjoy my bowl of frosted flakes. You know, I don't live in a particularly suburban area. In fact, it's quite urban, so there aren't a lot of lights in my neighborhood, let alone people with no melanin in their skin. And the headlights on my car are broken, because my car is old. Everything on my dash is like cracked, and there's like fucking bugs living in the glove compartment. It's fucking gross. When I'm driving at like 6 p.m., I can barely see 2 feet in front of me. I'm just trying to drive to GameStop to get the new monkey ball in my hand-me-down car from 2001, but I can't see where I'm going. It's like Sonic Genesis. And I don't mean Sega Genesis. I mean Sonic Genesis on Game Boy Advance. There's nothing advanced about this. I can't see. Yeah, speaking of 2001 and the Game Boy Advance, Dismemberment Plan released a pretty okay album that year. Robot Jones was still in the air. Jimmy Neutron just came out. Oh, Saudi Arabia just pulled off the best social experiment of all time.
2 airplanes.
More importantly, some random French guy named Guanil Nicolas designed the Game Boy Advance, and Nintendo had it on the market swiftly to pair with their upcoming GameCube. They also came out with fucking Half-Life in 2001. Remember that? Nicholas said he wanted the console to have a toy or prototype feel, which is pretty fucking awesome. This thing definitely comes off as like a Fisher-Price toy, but I think it's better for it. If it were any sleeker, I probably wouldn't like it. It kind of reminds me of the gamepad, which is equally as toy-like, but damn, I love this thing. It's the perfect size, length, and material for what it is, just like the GBA. I can't play Mother 3 on it though, so who fucking cares? Despite being a 32-bit console, the tech behind the GBA essentially made it a downgraded SNES alternative. People were way down for this though because it was portable and really convenient. Kinda like how people are settling for the Switch being a downgraded PS3, because they can play Hollow Knight on the toilet, where it belongs. The GBA was also cheap. Shit was like $100, you'd be crazy not to have one. When I was a kid, I only ever had the pink SP that I lost the charger to, so I never had the original landscape model, but I definitely prefer it, just on looks alone. Need to pick up a modded one with a backlight one day so I can play fucking Jet Set Radio. But anyway, yeah. The Game Boy Advance is definitely one of those really beloved consoles, so it's kind of funny to know how shitty its launch year was. It launched with Mario 2 and F-Zero on it, which are games you could already play elsewhere, but I guess it's nice to have them portably. Then they came out with a shitty Mario Kart, and then like 2 strategy games, Advance Wars and Golden Sun. Now, I've heard lots of people talk good about both those games, but imagine being a Nintendo fan in 2001 that doesn't give a shit.
Look at me, do I look cool or not? Low, I look retarded.
You were stuck playing Mario 2 until November. You can beat that shit in a night. Like, oh boy, can't wait to beat Mario 2 for the 100th time. No! You know what? Imagine being a Nintendo fan in 2001, period. I guess they objectively covered all their bases for their launch year on the genre of games that were covered, but this objectively doesn't matter, because Wario Land 4 came out on November 19th, completely validating your purchase of a Game Boy Advance. They said, let's take Wario and put him in Egypt! Arabian Nights, baby! Some of the first things you get when typing Wario Land 4 into the YouTube search bar is a plethora of videos that label the game as this hidden treasure or undiscovered masterpiece to present it to be more than what it is. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing bad about a catchy attention-grabbing title, but the content of most of these videos are completely void.
So, the game I'm playing right now is Wario Land 4.
Oh, that's actually one of my favorites. I like the second, though, better. I feel like since it's the original, you know, it stands out.
No, the first was the original, right?
Yeah, never mind. The first is the original.
They only really exist to perpetuate the game's reputation as this secret cult classic. Well, if you ask me, this game's pretty fucking popular. It's not underrated, or overlooked, or some other third thing. It's a good game, and it gets a lot of attention. In fact, I'd say this game gets too much attention compared to its contemporaries. You never see anyone talking about Virtual Boy Wario Land. In fact, most people forget it even exists when covering the whole series. If you're talking about Game Boy Advance games, Wario games, or Nintendo platformers in general, you can't sit 2 feet in front of you without someone calling this game a masterclass example of the genre. Calling Wario Land 4 Nintendo's greatest achievement is the Sonic had a tough time jumping into 3D of Wario games. Wario had a tough time jumping into Land 4. I don't want to portray that I know any better or any worse than that of any other gaming analyst YouTuber. Except, oh wait, yes I do. Stop using this clip.
Look, guys, look.
How many of these secret Nintendo Masterpiece videos have this or reference it? You ever see this?
Now we need to blow a hole in it. Do you have the bomb, retarded fool?
I can't believe he said retard. Can you believe he said retard? He said retarded. Oh! And by the way, really, what is it with people completely glossing over Virtual Boy? What, is it not good enough for you? Did you not know it existed or something? You couldn't do a Google search? Or would you rather have it be pink instead of red? Don't get me wrong, Wario Land 4 is the best game in the series, and I think it deserves the attention, no doubt, but I just think that attention's a bit misdirected. I only feel the need to bring all this shit up is because some jerk-off wrote a book about it. People cite this fucking book back and forth like it's gospel, when all of it is pseudo-intellectual bullshit you can find in a YouTube video. How could you have written so many words while saying absolutely nothing? People treat it as if writing a book is some insurmountable task that immediately validates how well your opinion is conveyed, when all it really means is you were stupid enough to write a book of empty pages. What, you got a publisher to produce your book for you, meaning you have some semblance of validity in your argument? Fuck you! What do you think Charles Dickens thought of Wario? I'm gonna talk about this book for a bit because it pisses me off. It was written by a Daniel Johnson, and I found a bunch of old forum posts of him saying he didn't even play Virtual Boy Wario Land! How can you see yourself fit to talk about a series of games when you haven't even played the first sequel? Imagine if I was talking about Mario Galaxy, and the only frame of reference I ever had for comparison was Mario Brothers. What the fuck? Granted, this book is mostly about Wario Land 4 and not all the other games, but an essential of talking about this game is to know how its previous entries functioned, which this guy supposedly claims he does, but to my knowledge, he barely brings them up in the book beyond passing. How did you write 600 pages about Wario Land 4 while barely mentioning the other 4 games? Remember in the beginning of the video when I said that this dude shared his opinion on how his book is the most deep and comprehensive piece of writing ever written about a video game? Well, it's one of the first lines in the book, and he couples that statement with admitting that the book is less of a critique and analysis on Wario Land 4 and more of an evolved critique of games analysis as a whole. Boo! Maybe I'm missing the irony here, but listen, everyone and their mom who does games analysis does it because they saw some dude do it worse and they feel they can do better. In fact, most art is kind of like that. But imagine prefacing the front of your book with admitting that. This brand of self-awareness is infuriating. Just talk about Wario to me. Make me like you first before you fill my head with your shitty writing priorities. I don't care yet. I don't care at all, actually. I don't care. I came here to listen to you tell me Wario Land 4 is awesome, not how good it feels to drink your own cum. Forgive me for not reading the book all the way through. It's like 600 pages, but I skimmed through a lot of it, and every passage I read has so much of the dude just dragging out his vernacular to let me know he's an English major who paid attention. I can't even describe it, but like, look at this enemy chart. It's just so nothing. If anything, it's a bit inaccurate. Different transformations in this game have completely different vulnerability statuses. Some are invincible, some are completely open for attack, and some challenges involve you trying to avoid enemies that'll knock you out of a transformation you need. The difficulty relative to the states Wario can be in compared to the enemies isn't consistent, and that's what makes it good. Again, I didn't read the whole book, but that's a glaring inconsistency just from a surface level observation. I mean, read some of these reviews. They go into concise detail about my issues I had with the book through just skimming it, and these guys read the whole fucking thing. I want to quit talking about this shitty book now, cause it sucks. So just like quit citing it as if it's some kind of medal to be awarded to this game's quality. Just like play the game. Believe it or not, there's somewhat of a story here worth following. The staff went on record to say the story was made near the end of the game's development, but it still had a lot of ideas that connected aspects of the gameplay to it. The gameplay affected the story instead of the other way around, which is interesting. It's nothing too amazing, and if anything it's a little disjointed, but it contextualizes the locales of the game better than the other entries. You know, plot is like the last thing I care about in my baby platformer, but if it's fun enough, I can get a lot of brownie points for me. In something like Virtual Boy Wario Land, the plot only exists to give reason for the gameplay. I criticize factors of the story and setting in that game for how it correlates to the gameplay, or rather how they barely correlate when they easily could. Wario Land 4 smoothens that critique by taking a similar format to Virtual Boy Wario Land, but it justifies a couple elements of the gameplay as a result of the story. Like, the game takes place in this pyramid, so the tutorial is conveyed through hieroglyphs. Or like this weird old man snooping through the secret rooms. This guy's actually pretty interesting. His name's Mad Scienstein, or Arero Shitan Hakase, which means professor, or Dr. Arero Shitan. If you don't read into the plot at all, you wouldn't question him. You'd just pick him up and throw him where the puzzle needs you to without giving it a second thought. Once you look into it though, you realize he's actually a researcher, a part of the same group that discovered the pyramid you're in. He appears in a bunch of different Mario games too, but he first appeared in that Prince Sable game everybody only knows from Smash. He's kind of a cool do-it-all character actually. He shows up in Wario Land 3 as an enemy that transforms you, and he's even in Dr. Mario 64 as an opponent, and that game's my shit. He also did a character interview for Wario Land 4. And he talks about jerking off. And they got rid of him after this, which is kind of a shame. I'm always down for cool additions to the Mario cast. Could you imagine a world where they threw out Wario after Mario Land 2? Like I said before, this story's pretty disjointed, but it doesn't really matter. Honestly, your game's story doesn't need to be all that thought out for me to consider it good, especially in a platformer. As long as you have characters I can attach to and a clear motive to go by, you're all good. For Wario, it's that he wants treasure and money, so he's always seeking out ways to get it. He reads in the paper about the recent discovery of a solid gold pyramid called the Pyramid of Shakora, which was excavated and dug up by a group of researchers and archaeologists. Wario decides to race over there in his El Dorado that looks like an AMC Gremlin X, while having no regard for the safety and well-being of any cats in the area. When he gets there, the same cat he nearly killed decides it fit to end its life early, and Wario feels remorse because he's a black cat guy, and he jumps after it. You know, I can totally resonate with that. I saw Nichijou, and I liked Sakamoto. I read GamerCat. I like those cursed images of black cats. They're cute. I like them. Maybe if it was any other kind of cat, say a bobtail or one of those weird gray hairless cats, Wario just would have turned around and went home. Would have said, fuck that, that drops too high, and left. But he doesn't. Because Wario loves black pussy. Pussy! He ends up falling into a mobile game, which seems like a really easy joke to make here, but this bit genuinely reminded me of Tomb of the Mask. It's a cool time waster game with a similar aesthetic to the world map here. After completing a cool tutorial, all the different world options open up to Wario. Each world sends him into a different setting he has to traverse in order to find the tablet pieces that Mr. MacGuffin hid everywhere. Once he's found all of them in a world, he can conquer that area's boss and send the treasure acquired into the pyramid's core. After you've liberated all 4 areas and plundered all their treasure, the inner pyramid's passage will open, leading you to this place called the Golden Room, which isn't anything like the Velvet Room. You know, I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank recently. You know, that fucking show with the investors. It's got fucking Mark Cuban, Lori Greiner, Damon John, all these big entrepreneurs. And every time I watch this show, I get a funny feeling about one of the sharks, Mr. Wonderful. It's got that big suit, the balding hairstyle, the defined nose. I think I finally figured him out. He looks like he's gonna sell me a persona!
When you have no soldiers, you're wiped out. That's the game of life. Stop this madness. Okay, that's wonderful. But how do I make money off depressed people? You know why you're wearing those ties? You're pigs. Pigs get slaughtered. Poo-poo. Poo-poo. Pee-pee poo-poo. Why are you being so greedy? You've completely wasted my time. I'm out.
You see, it turns out the pyramid itself was buried by a greedy villain named the Golden Diva, who's looking to sink the pyramid and keep its riches for herself, and drive away any royalty from her plan. Princess Shakora, ruler of the country in Wario Land 4, was turned into a cat during the infiltration through a curse the Diva had put on her. Powerless to stop the Diva on her own, Cat Shakora roams the street in modern day. When she catches wind of Wario's plan to plunder the pyramid for all its riches by almost getting run over, she decides to help out Wario. Turns out the curse casted on Shakora grants her the ability to transform into these different shadow figures. She uses this to help Wario on his quest by guiding him to where he needs to be as a cat or supplying him with items as the shopkeeper. Wario, of course, doesn't really know or care about what's really going on, he's just kind of in it for the treasure. After platforming through the Golden Passage, Wario comes face to face with the Golden Diva, who's the final boss of the game. After Wario beats the shit out of her, the curse befalling the pyramid and the princess is lifted, and we get some pretty fun alternate endings differing on how quickly you beat each boss. The different endings show off Shakora's 4 different forms she can take. A baby, a Warioette, a long-haired princess, and a man! You get to see Wario kiss a baby like a pedophile or kiss a man like a homo! I'm guessing her different ending forms implicate some leftover transformation powers in her, which makes me question how long Shakora's been around in the world of Mario. Just how much influence do her transformation powers have on previous games like Wario Land 2 or 3? Maybe the transformations aren't sourced from Shakora, but rather the Golden Diva herself, who's more of an entity than a person. It's likely that the Golden Divas existed longer than Wario or even Shakora herself, spreading her transformation curse wherever she passes through. This would make sense actually, especially considering the only Wario Land game after this, Shake It, has no transformation sourced from enemies. The Golden Diva doesn't exist anymore. Shakora is supposed to be like An ancient princess, which is further conveyed in all versions of the ending, where she's raised into heaven and granted a halo, showing her age. So she's supposed to be, like, dead, but the curse granted to her was restricting her access into the afterlife, which is pretty interesting considering other aspects of the game. The levels you get sent to through the vortexes have implications of existing in separate dimensions, and there's a consistent eerie theme of death or passing on in the game I picked up on. There's a level that's just your basic fire volcanic zone that freezes over at a certain point during your escape. Before I looked into it, I found it weird that this level was positioned in the part of the game where the rest of the levels were horror themed. Lava levels that freeze over are not a new concept for a platformer game. In fact, it's a bit cliched at this point, but after looking into it, people seem to interpret this level as hell instead of just some old cave. It kinda makes sense too, considering the level placement in the world and the phrase when hell freezes over. This looming theme of death and passing is really subtly done, but there's tons of things that support it. All the levels in general aren't very populated with people, minus the professor giving them this like abandoned feeling. The keys used to unlock the next level are these ghost guys. But I'm not gonna talk about the plot in this video game anymore. It's not a perfect plot, but it provides enough intrigue and cool concepts to contextualize the platforming in an engaging way. I like all the weird, nondescript details and implications about the characters and the pyramid itself, and it just serves as a well thought out bonus. They didn't skimp out on it. But I want to talk about Wario's duck jump. When you crouch and you jump, he looks like a dog. When gameplay starts, the only option you can choose on the screen is a forced tutorial section. If this is your first time playing a Wario Land game, there's actually a lot to learn about Wario's moveset, so it makes sense to include an introductory level here. It isn't invasive at all though, which is sick. Most games, especially Nintendo games, would stop to open a dialogue box or have optional signs posted around that tell you how to play, but both ways of control conveyance in a tutorial kind of falter in some way. Text boxes can stop the flow of gameplay, and it can be easy to miss or ignore optional signs. It'd be like one of those stop playing the game for a bit prompts Nintendo's obsessed with putting in their games. But you know what though? I like those. I'm not trying to spend 8 hours of my day playing Wii Sports. I appreciate it. In fact, the name of this channel is based off one of those. It's in fucking Virtual Boy Wario Land.
Automatic pause?
What?
That's a good name for a channel. Oh, fuck.
The other alternative would just be to pop something on the screen that tells you how to play while you're still playing, but it can still seem pretty out of place. Wario Land 4 opts to paint the controls on the wall, which, isn't a completely unique or groundbreaking way of telling the player what to do, but having them be hieroglyphs adds a bit of reason to things, which is appreciated. The controls in this game are fucking great though. You got everything you need right from the get-go, no more unlock bullshit. You got your shoulder bash, your ground pound, you can pick enemies up and throw them, and you have a new dash. If you hold L or R, Wario will automatically begin sprinting in that respective direction, eventually hitting a terminal velocity, allowing him to barrel through most enemies and blocks. The move has this really cool afterimage effect attached to it, where Wario's animation will play behind him while going through an array of greens, blues, and purples. I really love this effect attached to the move. It has an automatic depth to it, making it look 3D to me in a way. The move itself is also great. It allows for fast-flowing movement in escape sections and easy traversal. Speaking of looking fantastic, the sprite work in this game is definitely the peak of the series. I really love the liberties they took from the art of Wario to his sprite. They decided to make his shoes purple from the usual green, made his hair pitch black, he turns into a dog when he duck jumps, I love it. Everything has that really detailed pixel art coloring, which meshes really well with the designs and shape structure of all the characters. It's something the game's indie successor, Pizza Tower, would take note of and opt to transform. That game has a more loose and unpolished style. It looks more like they were drawn freehand rather than meticulously done up. We'll talk more about Pizza Tower later, but I just wanted to bring it up now to mention how almost opposite the spriting styles are, despite equally complementing the designs and animations. Back to the moveset, it's a little weird to me they were so quick to drop the super jump after its usage in the first game. It doesn't show up in any other Wario game after 3, which is curious considering how unique of an ability it is to the character's arsenal. Maybe they couldn't find any use case for it, or maybe they just didn't feel the need to design platforming and puzzle elements around it, but I stand by its potential. A core of this game's structure is actually a bit comparable to the time platforming idea I talked about in the Virtual Boy Wario Land section, but since this game doesn't have the super jump, it always boils down to just getting to where you need to be within a tense amount of time. No justice for the super jump, I guess. The move feels like an idea they had for Wario to set him apart from Mario, but just couldn't push far enough to be useful in the games, especially since the move gets the most use in Wario Land 2 and 3's slower-based gameplay. I guess it's sort of like that move from Metroid where you run at like a Mach pace and then do a jump directly upward to reach new areas, but retooled to be more suited for Wario. Actually, the speed booster you get in the Metroid games is basically just the super dash you have in Wario Land 4. They have the same exact properties. The only difference is Samus has to unlock it, whereas Wario starts out with his. You'd think they would have added the move to Wario Land 2 or 3 so they can retool its application to better suit how similar those games are to Metroid, but no, it's in Wario Land 4. They probably just didn't think about it for 2 and 3, but its inclusion in 4 is pretty noteworthy, especially since, apparently, Zero Mission, Fusion, and Wario Land 4 were all developed using the same engine. There's a lot of visual and artistic similarities to Metroid Fusion and Wario Land 4, especially in the background art, but I don't know. A ton of games reuse or borrow assets from each other, even for games in entirely different series. That was like Valve's whole deal back then. Metroid and Wario being programmed on top of the same architecture is pretty cool though, especially noting how different the controls and physics are for both of them. The fact they share this speed booster / dash move is a cool tidbit that gives a little bit of insight to the internal workings of these two franchises, despite the completely opposing paths they ended up taking. Fusion and Wario Land 4 also use the same fucking font. Anyway, there aren't a lot of vertical levels in this game. I think there's like 2, but I think combining shoulder bashing, dashing, and super jumps in one winding obstacle course would make for great reactionary platforming. They sort of do this with the Golden Passage, which is the last level that's meant to test all your abilities, but the level is more centered around the transformations Wario can go through rather than his own moveset. This is fine. It actually works kind of well regarding some transformations needing to be avoided and others being required, but I would have much rather had this level be split into 2. One testing the player's knowledge and prowess of their base moves, and another testing them on their handle of the transformations. The Golden Passage itself is a little frustrating because of how it's laid out. The screen below the progression layer is full of water that pushes you back to the previous challenge, meaning if you fuck up, you have to do it again. This wouldn't really be that much of an issue if collecting the boss tablets didn't also send you back to redo the challenge. Just give me that shit as a reward for doing it. Why should I have to go and do it all over again? It's the same as the Wario Land 2 shit where getting transformed sets you back. Granted, it's done better here, but a smooth turd is still equally as comparable to a chunky turd. They're both poo-poo. I only want to focus on the base moves because the physics in this game feel like a really good blend of Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land. Wario's maneuverability in this game is pretty comparable to Virtual Boy Wario Land's emphasis on flow and continuous movement, but his weight and speed without dashing is more akin to the first game. You can still do that shoulder bash jump trick to gain speed, but because of the addition of the dash, it isn't your top speed and is more reserved for tight platforming done quickly and precisely, which is awesome. This kind of movement is present throughout the entire game, but is really apparent in the Golden Passage, which is why I wish it was more of a focus. Everything about how Wario moves works in tandem together, and it makes for a lot of really unique platforming challenges within the level structure. Speaking of which, I guess now is a good time as ever to talk about that.
My next point.
Each stage has Wario trying to find the key to progress to the next level, which is exactly how it worked in Virtual Boy Wario Land. The difference here, however, is that in order to exit the level, you don't need the key. Instead, you need to step on this frog switch. The switch opens a portal back to the hub located at the beginning of the level, and often the switch to open said portal is near the end. There's a time limit to how long the portal's open, and once it runs out, the treasure you collected on your expedition will start to fly out of you until you leave. If you run out of treasure, it's time's up. The key, who's this cute little ghost guy named Keezer by the way, is actually used to unlock the entrance to the next level, not the exit to the one you're in. You can grab or ignore Keezer and easily make your way to egress either way.
What's egress mean?
Exit.
However, because the exit is your entrance, you have to find the frog switch. This is in contrast to Virtual Boy Wario Land, where you can't leave the level you're in until you've found the key. The reason for this difference is so that if you're having trouble finding Keezer, you can leave the level without him, travel to a course in a different world, and then just come back for him later. Yeah, Wario Land 4 has an open level structure like that. I'm guessing the reason they did it is so that the game could be longer in comparison to Virtual Boy Wario Land. You can play the first level in any world without a price, meaning you can do it in whatever order you want, but the difficulty progression of the worlds is a little vague and isn't conveyed by the map very well. Players not looking to experiment will most likely play the levels in a counterclockwise order, but the difficulty of each zone is broken up oddly. In hindsight, since green is the easiest, then yellow, then red, then blue, you'd think the placement of the zones would reflect that, but they're seemingly placed at random. While I do think the passages should be sat next to each other in order of difficulty, making the progression open like this gives as much time as the player needs to feel out what levels they want to spend the most time in and which they want to avoid. Maybe they feel one level is too hard and want to come back to it later, whether it be because they keep dying or they can't find all the tablets to open the boss door. They can do this, they're allowed to enter a different level in a different zone. I'm guessing the team did this so you'd play the game more on your first playthrough. Once you learn all there is to know about how the worlds work in this game, your second playthrough won't have any hiccups with you switching worlds unless you just want to play a different level just because. Dedicated players will most likely just knock out whatever world they choose to go for without switching around, but it really just depends on how you want to play the game. Perhaps ideally, the world map would have Wario automatically walk over the entrance to the green world after completing the tutorial, but not enter it. This would instill the idea in the player that this is where the game wants you to go due to its easy difficulty. If the worlds were placed in counterclockwise order of difficulty and the game forces Wario to move right, it would also encourage new players to keep moving right if they want to tackle each level in order of difficulty. This addition might sound like it would ruin the game's open-ended nature, but the function would only occur once after finishing the tutorial, and you could easily go against what the game was pushing you to do to go to another world instead. I can imagine some people who played this game for the first time ended up playing the green passage last and maybe felt duped by its difficulty, but this could potentially remedy that problem. I think it would be a lot more comforting if the game pointed you in the right direction a bit, at least on your first playthrough. It probably wouldn't be that hard to implement this on an internal level, but I don't know. People don't like to be told what to do when they play a video game, so maybe this is a stupid idea. The more you play the game over, the more you just tend to tackle each world in the order given to you anyway. The world map isn't bad as is, it's actually really smart. I just think a few areas of it could be polished to make it even better. It's an answer to the world map introduced in Wario Land 3, but also a response to the linear progression design in the original Wario Land. It's a really great blend. Talk about the levels already, I'm getting antsy! I'm just going to go through the ones I think are interesting or important in terms of visuals or mechanics. The first world is the Emerald Passage, which has your obvious level themes covered. There's a sunny tropical area, a floral treetop, a basic lake, and a rainforest jungle. There's surprisingly a lot to talk about with the first level, Palm Tree Paradise. It's an introduction level that allows the player to get a handle on most of their skills from the get-go, like in any other game. But I think it also accurately instills the collectathon objective of getting as much treasure as you can in a really intriguing way. I didn't really question it when initially playing this series, but the motive of getting as much treasure as you can in Wario Land is sort of intrinsic to the player, especially if they've already played a Mario game before. This is done beyond Wario's characterization as a protagonist fueled by greed, as collecting money and other goodies can be a focal point in Mario games. You want to collect all the coins you can find in a Mario game because that shit gives you lives, which is security for when you bust your ass on a Koopa. It works as security in Wario Land 4 as well, protecting you from a time-up death, but that aspect of collecting treasure doesn't come up often enough for the player to worry about collecting things for that reason. It's not like Sonic where you want rings because they'll keep you safe, you want treasure because you want a good score. The game even calculates your points at the end of each level and records high scores, giving it elements of a score attack. The score attack nature of this game is helped by the level's condensed design. You can beat almost all of them within like 2 to 4 minutes, which makes them good to replay and try your hand at a better score. Losing treasure during a time-up section isn't disheartening because your security is running up. It's disheartening because you just worked your ass off to get a good score. Score! The game incentivizes collection with the score system, but also in its placement of goodies right off the bat. Right near the beginning of the level, there's a group of gems just high enough where Wario can't jump to get them, but there's an outline of a block that, when filled in, would allow Wario to easily jump up and grab them. You could just find the switch needed to fill in the blocks and get them during your escape to the level. In fact, it might even be more efficient to do that, but there's other ways of achieving the same goal here. There's an enemy right below the gems here that, when jumped on, will give you just enough height to collect them, but hasty players might see the enemy and instantly shoulder bash it, ruining their chance of using it for extra height. Thankfully though, there's an enemy on the same screen you can lead under the gems by picking them up and dropping them where they need to be, allowing you to jump on them if you missed your chance before. Listen, I don't want to question your intelligence by over-explaining this, since it's so simple, but the conflicting motive of the player to collect gems and kill enemies for score is instantly challenged in the first level, and I think that's really cool. I don't want to make it seem like I'm talking down to you. It's instantly clear that there's more than one way to get this group of gems within Wario's moveset, and upon reflection, this might have been why they didn't include the super jump. Being able to jump higher would have added a more instantaneous option for collecting loads of treasure in this game, since there's a lot of similar challenges like this one scattered throughout. Perhaps robbing Wario of a versatility option in order to make challenges require more critical thinking was a trade the designers were willing to make, but I still think the inclusion of the super jump would have lent itself to a lot of cool potential platforming sequences. Later in the level, there's a hidden wall that has a bonus gem inside that has a hint of green hanging off of it, indicating that you can walk through the wall. Maybe it's because this is the first level and they want you to realize that there can be secrets like this around the game, but they indicate it even further by putting a conspicuous platform leading into the wall on the other end of it. The first side of the wall doesn't have a platform leading into it, and if you notice the ground indication on that side, you can enter from there. If you miss it on a first pass, they just make it more obvious to make sure that you don't miss it, at least just for this first level. The rest of the level is pretty standard. There's another invisible wall you can pass through for another bonus gem, but this one's a one-way door. You can't enter from the other side due to the size of the exit. I initially thought this was some kind of layering trick. Maybe entering the secret wall puts you on a layer behind the main layer, meaning trying to enter it from a layer trigger that's meant to put you on the main layer wouldn't work. Now that I look at it, the way the ground is leveled makes it so that to even have a chance at fitting through the hole, you need to do a shoulder bash jump, which increases Wario's hitbox just enough to where he'll bounce off the wall and not be able to fit in. What's cool about these secret walls is that if you're aware of their existence, you can use them to escape faster during the time section, which I like a lot. It's especially important since the faster you escape, the more points you get. The way this game is constantly giving you things to take into consideration on top of your current priority is really engaging and only evolves as the game goes on and the levels get more complex. Wario Land 4 still has the transformation forms, but they're leagues better in this game than they are in any other entry. The first instance of transforming in the game is Fat Wario in this first level. Wario's kind of a weird guy. When he eats an apple, he gets real fat, and it makes the game not fun. I'm not a fan of this transformation in general, but it's definitely streamlined in this game compared to the previous entries. It thankfully doesn't last nearly as long as the previous games, and the applications it's used for are alright. Instead of requiring Fat Wario as the only means for finding a secret or completing a puzzle, he's usually a transformation that leads you to an area where you'll find a different transformation you need to progress. Fat Wario essentially just makes your normal jump have the properties of a ground pound, but also decrease the height of your jump and slows you down. This is mostly used to break blocks under a ceiling that you normally couldn't ground pound to break, which is maybe a bit rudimentary, but it's never used in an annoying or obtuse way for it to bother me, unlike in Wario Land 2 or 3. I think whoever was in charge of designing the transformations for this game could have done something a lot more interesting with Fat Wario. It's just such a boring transformation that adds nothing to the game beyond making it slower. It's not even that hard to fix. All you really have to do is shorten how long the transformation lasts even more. Maybe even set it up so 5 jumps will turn Wario back to normal or something. That's pretty good. You could even design platforming puzzles around that. Maybe start with Fat Wario on the top of the screen and have it so you need to fall to platforms below him and reach a block that he can only break within 5 jumps. If you go over 5 jumps, you miss out on the treasure because you turn back to normal, but if you make it with another jump intact, you can break the block and reach it. And they already have blocks that you can break only with Fire Wario, signified by a fire symbol, so I find it strange they didn't do the same for Fat Wario, instead opting to just make his jumps act like normal ground pounds. Right now, Fat Wario just sort of wastes any time I could be spending playing the game, which sucks. He's definitely my least favorite transformation, but he's also used the least of the bunch, so I guess it isn't too bad. The game isn't too egregious for too long, just a little bit. Like I said before, you mostly use Fat Wario to break these hidden blocks to access areas you couldn't before, but most of the time there's no reason for it to need the transformation. If the ceiling wasn't always low, you could just ground pound this shit, but again, the transformation isn't used much anyway. I kinda wish blocks you're meant to destroy with it always looked like this one in Palm Tree Paradise, where it melds into the tile set already on screen, but that might be better suited for harder levels. It's less obvious than making it the basic hard-to-break blue block asset and forces the player to analyze their surroundings better, but it's not too big of a deal, I guess. If anything, it would make more sense to have an obvious block here, considering this is the first level. There's secrets in this game that have no indication of existing at all, but this tile they use to hide the underground section in this level is a great idea. It's unfortunate they opt to signify secrets with such an obvious asset more than half the time, but I don't know, maybe they were just sick of spriting shit. Have you ever made a sprite sheet before? It's fucking annoying, so, I don't blame them. I guess now would be as good a time as ever to talk about the transformations as a whole. Wario Land 4 has the same transformations from the previous games, but opts to take away the superfluous ones instead of making a batch of new ones. They all, on paper, function similarly to the way that they used to, but there's a lot of underlying changes in the function, physics, and application of them that makes them more enjoyable to use. The crux of the transformation mechanic was always about hindering Wario's mobility in order to give him a unique attribute he couldn't do before in his base state. They aren't straight up upgrades to him, unlike the hats in the earlier games, which sets them apart as a central mechanic. Wario Land 2 and 3, as I discussed before, mostly uses transformations to take the player through slow, gated progression puzzles that don't really require any problem solving or critical thinking. Either that or they just straight up send him backwards. It was usually Wario needs to get here, transform and take him there, but oh, the transformation sucks, so you'll probably fuck up a lot and have to retry. The good thing about the transformations in 4 though is that they don't entirely suck to use. They still have ones you're meant to avoid that send you back, but there's a lot less of them and they only appear as a proper avoidable obstacle when platforming. And even then, some of the puzzle rooms use those transformations in unique puzzle solving applications. It's true that I'd rather be normal Wario most of the time, but since they tweak so much of the functions of the transformations, I don't groan when I see one. It's just lots of polishing and little things. Like Puffy Wario can accelerate his ascent now, making it faster to cancel out of him by hitting the ceiling if you fucked up. Flat Wario's falling arc has been fixed and is completely smooth compared to the horribly conveyed jittery nightmare of 2 and 3. Fire Wario is way more interesting than before. He's mostly used in areas where the block you need to destroy is higher up, so you need to time your jumps and count how many walls you need to bounce off of in order to get where you need to be. They aren't perfect, of course. Snowball Wario, while used for some cool puzzles, lasts too long and halts flow, and Frozen Wario definitely isn't used enough for puzzles, and Fat Wario exists. As a whole, though, the transformations are miles better than they were, and I'll go more into it on a level-by-level basis. What I like about Wario Land 4 is that the game is more centered around blending action platforming and puzzle solving, which means the transformations need to not only test your puzzle solving skills, but also your platforming skills. It's an evolution of what was introduced in Virtual Boy Wario Land, but even that game had more of a priority on platforming than it did puzzles. Puzzos. I'll go more into my designation of design priority of all the games later, but first, I want to highlight some levels in the Topaz world, and that's Big Board and Domino Row. This is gonna be fucking long, so... Both levels have exclusive external mechanics Wario has to deal with in them. Big Board has a roulette that will help or hinder him, and Domino Row has a switch that triggers a race against dominoes that'll close off paths to bonuses if you lose. They're both really unique levels. In fact, all the levels in the Topaz world have something like this. Most levels in the game have something like this, but it's definitely the most prevalent here. It's the one world that changes the status quo structure of the game the most, which is cool considering its toy boxy creation theme. In Big Board, when you stand underneath this fucking underneath. Okay, in Big Board, you stand under this block of numbers that are spinning in succession. A line of different results will appear on the screen, and it becomes abundantly clear how these two things correlate. Okay. Getting a number on the block progresses the line forward that many spaces, and your goal is to manipulate what number you get so you can land on your desired result. The results may range from giving Wario more health, spitting out a bonus diamond, spawning a batch of enemies, or maybe even changing Wario into whatever transformation is needed in that room. This is a really cool idea, but its execution is rather lackluster on top of the level being a little on the short side. This level is almost entirely focused on figuring out how to solve that room's puzzle or get to whatever treasure there is and move on, so platforming takes a bit of a back seat here. That's not a bad thing though, it's actually quite enjoyable as a pace breaker. The new mechanic is fun to mess around with and take advantage of to get goodies, but unfortunately that's all it's really used for, bonus treasure. The level doesn't force you to get antiquated with the roulette at all in order to progress. You can just skip every instance of it by darting to the end. There's nothing blocking you from moving forward. You'd think it shouldn't even matter, especially since the motive to collect as much treasure as you can is already embedded into the player, but it has a lot of unexpected drawbacks. On my first time playing this level, I actually missed a handful of secrets because the game just let me pass through without exploring, and I got carried away. The level doesn't incentivize taking advantage of this new mechanic to seek out all you can. If there were multiple blockades in a room that you had to clear out by using the roulette, it would let the player know there's multiple paths to take so they don't forget and maybe come back during their escape to see what they missed. Maybe that's my fault, but it seems like an odd oversight they didn't block progression through the level via the central mechanic. It's like they forgot or something. This wouldn't really be a problem if it wasn't mandatory to use the roulette to exit the level, and it's made even worse since the way this is conveyed is super vague. At the end of the level, you're placed in a room with seemingly no exit, and the only thing inside of it is a roulette box. The walls are plastered with "Get a goal," and the floor below you is flashing rainbow colors with the same phrase. What you're supposed to do is hit the block over and over and make the line reach its end, designated by a goal icon, but when I got here I was completely stumped. I didn't know the line had an end to it, let alone that it was designated by a goal, so I spent the entire time just mumbling "get a goal" to myself like a psycho while trying to find an exit to the room that didn't even exist.
What am I getting? What am I doing?
Yeah, just
get a goal?
Just get the diamond.
Why? What does this mean?
Okay. Oh, wait.
Well, that doesn't fucking help me. How do I get out of here? Get a goal? But why?
Thank God.
No, what do I need to do?
I don't know.
What the fuck? Ah, fucking A. What the fuck? I can't go back. Yeah, I don't know. What the fuck? This is the only room I can go into, too. Get a goal.
Yeah.
What's the goal?
There. It has to be the diamond.
I already... The diamond just gives you a diamond.
Hey, no, we'll hit it again.
It just gives me a diamond, doesn't it? Yeah.
What the hell? Well, at least you got a diamond.
It's not gonna matter!
There's a couple of really easy ways this could have been fixed up that I can't for the life of me think why they didn't go for. For one, starting the level in a room that paints what each icon does on the wall would have been really helpful to the conveyance of the mechanic, just like they did with the tutorial. It would also let the player know beforehand that there's an end to the line, so they wouldn't have to guess as much come the end of the level. As it is now, you have no way of knowing what each result does until you try them, and that can lead to some guesswork, which is completely unnecessary. You're just meant to trust what the game tells you to get on these signs, but again, there's no way of knowing what each of them does until you try it, and it can lead to you getting hit or making a mistake due to the surprise. It sounds like I'm whining here, but it just feels like arbitrary difficulty. Like here, you're meant to spawn enemies to throw them through the breakable wall and crawl through to a bonus, but because the game spawns 3 over your head and they're an enemy type that you've not only never seen before, but will also hurt you if you touch them, it's all but too likely you'll panic and get hit for no reason. If the enemy spawned behind you instead of on top of you, or if the enemy type was one you've already seen before in the level, like these toy Wario cars, it wouldn't be that much of an issue. It's just conveyed really poorly, but it doesn't even really matter in the long run since it isn't required to beat the level anyway, which just sort of makes it worse. Even if you use every roulette the amount of times the game wants you to, there really is no way of knowing there's an end to the line once you get to the final room. I just assumed it was endless, which I think is a valid thing to think. It would be different if the room had the line graphic plastered on the wall. Maybe they highlight the goal icon with the asset they made for it. The phrase "get a goal" is way too vague for me to discern anything about what the fuck that's supposed to mean. It needs to be a lot clearer. Why didn't it just say "finish the line" or something? I also think the level would benefit from better application of the mechanic in general. It would be interesting if in order to progress you were forced to use the block, but each path to progression required a different result. Maybe the numbers on the block don't spin in succession, but at random, and it's up to chance what result you end up getting that'll help you through whatever respective path you end up having to take. It's gonna be a little bit confusing, but, stick with me here. If they were designing the mechanic based around reacting to the shock of the result, I think this would have been way better. For example, let's say you come to a crossroads and there's one roulette block that'll disappear once you hit it. One path has a block only Fire Wario can break in order to enter, and the other has these mini blocks that you can throw an enemy through, allowing you to crawl through once you've done it. Once you hit the block and it gives you your randomly designated result, you need to react and approach the challenge accordingly to which one you're gonna get. Or what if there were 3 paths, one only reachable via Fire Wario, one that you need to throw something quickly through to access, like a bomb or something, and one Wario can just access himself without anything extra. If you miss your chance as Fire Wario, or the bomb explodes before you can align it for a throw, you still have the option to proceed as normal Wario. However, normal Wario's path has less goodies for you to collect. Maybe particularly hard to reach paths would harbor things like the collectible CDs or diamonds. Once you reach the end and you hit the frog switch, what if the roulettes change from random numbers to ones that go in order? That way, whatever your escape path looked like, you could plan what results you got better than the first half, allowing you to travel faster under the time limit. Listen, I'm just spitballing here, but I think giving the player multiple ways to accomplish the same goal would do this level and this mechanic justice. It's fine as it is now being exclusively for bonus treasure, but I think it could be a whole lot better if it was required to use. Oh yeah, this level also has this really fucking scary background. I own one less pair of jeans because of this shit. I pee-peed. I pissed myself. Speaking of the backgrounds, there's a couple of really cool ones that are definitely just 3D models they scanned in. It reminds me of something out of Hylix or DKC. This game really covers its bases artistically in this aspect, which is why I think it might be my favorite Wario Land visually, aside from the really great sprite art. This is definitely the peak of intrigue of art in this series, which means, shit, it's all downhill from here. Which also means I think Shake It looks bad. There's tons of different tones, aesthetics, and styles being displayed all at once in Wario Land 4, and one might say they feel inconsistent or out of place, but I feel it's that way on purpose. Everything looks the way it does for an extrapolatable reason.
Ow, ow,
6-syllable words hurt my brain.
Like that one minigame you played being low detail because it's being played off of a TV, or hell, even the backgrounds I just mentioned. I'd wager one of the reasons this giant robot's a 3D image they scanned in was so that they could really convey the imposing nature of it through its scale and depth, which is really hard to emulate with pixel art. You might not even notice this robot's a render in the first place, but the light bouncing off that soldering tool is a good tell, and it was definitely done with intent. There are other backgrounds in the game that look like they could be 3D, but they definitely aren't. Like that creepy stuffed animal one is definitely just meticulously well done pixel art, and one of the factory ones even looks like photobashed images of real pipes and machinery. There's of course no way to know for sure, but I feel like they wouldn't go through this effort to cover this many styles with such limiting hardware in the first place if they didn't give a shit. It leaves a lot of room for the artists to explore a bunch of different options on how to portray the tone they're going for each world. I don't mean to shit on Celeste so hard in this video, but a big reason I really can't get down with that game's visual style is because of the lack of thought that went into covering that many bases. You got the pixel art character sprites in-game, the hand-drawn portraits during speech, the 3D low-poly world, which they're all well made, but they feel superfluous or thoughtless. Like, it feels like they didn't think about how the art would gel together, but instead just did a bunch of things they thought were cool where they don't fit for no reason. Now, Celeste is nothing like Wario Land in any other way, but I think they're a bit contrastable in this case. Wario also has a world map with a different camera angle compared to its gameplay, but it maintains the normal style the rest of the game holds. No other part of the game looks like the world map, but it maintains the same visual style regardless. It's not like they couldn't have done something different for the world map if they wanted to. I can see them doing something natively 3D here, or for the backgrounds. The GBA was definitely capable of shit like that, but they just decided not to for sake of consistency within their inconsistency. Or, you know, maybe they couldn't. The Game Boy was kind of a piece of shit when it came to native 3D. All the pre-rendered stuff in this game is compressed really cleverly though to make it seem like it was sprited. Some of the art is made to just look 3D, but then some of it is made to look simple yet effective, kind of like Yoshi's Island. Yoshi's Island also had some 3D though. It just all feels really thought out in Wario Land, but then again, maybe the Celeste thing is an unfair comparison. There's definitely visual aspects of Wario Land 4 that are missteps in this direction. These end cards don't look like any other close-up shots in the game, and Wario's proportioned all weird. You can definitely tell it was done by a different artist they had on. And not every minigame is low detail or made with the TV thing in mind. One of them just uses straight-up game assets, but even then, they're wholly original sprites that appear there and nowhere else, so... I'm a little biased against Celeste, I'll admit, but still, that's an indie game made by a little over 8 people under a budget, you know, not counting all these fucking writing assistants and narrative consultants. Yeah, great job, guys! What'd you do? Alright, I was looking for footage to put in this part, and I forgot that Celeste won the Best Independent Game at the Game Awards in 2018. And I also forgot that this gag was also there.
Oh, no, that wasn't a good one. We didn't get a good one. My eyes were closed. Say Manchego!
Manchego?
That's a good one, that's a good one. Oh, I'm gonna get some big V-Bucks for this, okay?
In any case, though, it makes sense there'd be a lot of room for error for them, and they deserve a lot of credit where credit is due. Wario Land 4 had a team of 21 experienced Japanese old men with big Nintendo bucks in their leather wallets on the staff. And the only 2 guys not experienced on the team were the art guys, Goro Abe and Ko Takuchi. They were both programmers and designers on this game as their first project at Nintendo, and would immediately end up leading the WarioWare series right after, so it's no stretch of the imagination to say that they were also semi-responsible for the art in this game. There's unfortunately no one credited for the art direction, but if I had to take an educated guess, I'd say it was these 2. But, you know, what do I know? The scale between a Nintendo game and an indie game is definitely not comparable, which is almost impossible to avoid talking about when comparing game stuff like this, so I'll just trust you know what I mean and we'll move on. See, I can say stuff like that to you now because we're like, what, a couple hours into the video? Not on the first page of my book? No one's credited for the sound design either, which sucks because it's pretty damn great. I really appreciate all the little things they took the time to execute, like the music getting quicker the faster Wario's moving, getting all fucked up when he transformed, or however whatever Wario spats out himself is also subject to morph with the music. They ultimately don't add much to the game itself, but it makes the experience all the more memorable. It all adds to the vibe of the game, and coupling it with unique instrumentation and utilization of the GBA sound font makes it all really interesting. There's all these weird samples of actual singing, but it's paired with a heavy emphasis on that digital organ everybody loves so much now, which rules. They actually ended up reusing a lot of the compositions they made for Wario Land 4 in the original WarioWare, but that makes sense considering these games share a composer, Ryoji Yoshitomi. It also makes me feel like they maybe wanted to make Wario Land and WarioWare extensions of the same universe, but one ended up being more successful and cost-efficient than the other and took over, so whatever. I think Yoshitomi did a good job of making a lot of really catchy tracks. His previous credits include help with the music on the original Wario Land, but he also helped with the sound design on Mario Paint, which leads me to believe he also did the sound for this game, but that's a total guess. He also did the sound effects for the original Mario Maker, which is like the most well-designed sound on the Wii U in my opinion. Actually, you know, he really likes that, doesn't he? Seems to be a trend that the sound is connected to the music in some way with most of the projects he works on. It sort of reminds me of that old video of that Mario World ROM hack level that's like a auto runner music thing. Shit blew my mind as a kid, still kinda awesome. It's a classic. DIY is sort of a good way of describing it, I think. You know, these scanned-in pictures of models, real-life images of people, samples being used from everywhere like fucking dog noises and car crashes and shit, but they somehow correlate really well. They'd evolve on this scrappy, weird tone more in the WarioWare games, and it really works there. There's even a game where you can make your own assets for your own micro games, so it's cool how it all kind of works out that way. There really isn't much to say about the music and sound in Wario Land 4 that hasn't already been said before, so it's a little bit hard to talk about. It's pretty good, but I'm definitely not humming any of these songs. I mean, come on, I wouldn't listen to this shit in my car on my way to work or some shit. You ever heard of, like, Tim Fallon? Fucking Anamana Gucci? You fucking... They go... You know what I'm saying? There are these collectible CDs that add to a sound room I could talk about, I guess. They don't give you the music for the level you found them in, but instead an entirely original track, a lot of which are very avant-garde. It's not like high art or anything, most of it is just repeated sounds that indicate some kind of circumstance, like a tap dance battle or something, but it's still really neat. So yeah, the art in this game is pretty fucking good. I really like the time up graphic. That's a fucking, oh, that's such a good video. Anyway, the other level I wanted to highlight is Domino Row, which is thankfully a lot better than Big Board. Once you pass this pole, a row of dominoes will start to fall, and your goal is to race them to the end to push this button on their path before they do. If Wario pushes the button before the dominoes do, it'll topple a special set of blocks that are frequently blocking not only optional treasures like secret rooms or diamonds, but also the tablets you need to progress to the boss. If the dominoes push the button before Wario does, the wall stays unchanged and you're locked out of whatever was behind it forever, unless you restart the level. This immediately fixes the easy progression issue in Big Board and makes for a much more high-stakes level. The level also has overall better conveyance than Big Board. The first room you spawn in has no dominoes to race, and it gives you a button to push for free, allowing you to progress. It lets the player know what their objective is quickly and pushes them in the right direction right off the bat in a non-intrusive way. And maybe the solution to the conveyance of Big Board I proposed is intrusive, but that mechanic is pretty complex compared to this one, so I think it's a bit warranted to let the player know what they're getting into. Anyway, back to fucking dominoes. Everyone knows this basic game design shit where you fucking introduce the mechanic in a safe environment and fucking Undertale, whatever, you know, you get it. This level does that in a way where I didn't even really question it. It's really natural. Most levels with a new thing to grasp do this, but I think Domino Row stands out for its focus on platforming in a fast, precise way. I really like that most of the treasure you can collect in a room with dominoes only exists when the dominoes are falling. Makes the player not only think about what moves they need to utilize to get to where they need to be fast, but also what path they're taking. Also, all the rooms in this level are designed for you to be able to go backwards through once hitting the button so you don't miss any potential goodies off the beaten path. If you're really cool though, you can get everything during the race against the dominoes, wasting some time in the race overall, but maintaining flow of movement. I love that a lot. It splits whatever treasures hidden around the rooms to be exploited by two different kinds of players. Those who know within their ability that they can get it during the race, or those who want to prioritize ensuring they don't miss out on whatever the dominoes will block if they lose. It's sort of a risk versus reward thing, but the reward of immediate treasure is within the risk of potentially messing up and losing the race, on top of achieving flow of movement, which is awesome. I personally don't want to fucking stop and go back through the room I'm in. I want to do everything as I see it, especially since I'm not sure if I'll be able to come back to the room I'm in during the escape. This kind of design also really encourages speed running. It has elements of path optimization gameplay. Maybe this is just my preference bias, but some of my favorite games are the ones where you're meant to do something really, really fast, and there's an optimal way of doing so that the designers intended. More than half the fun in those games isn't doing what you're meant to do, but it's figuring out what they want you to do. I love that shit a lot. You see it in like Trackmania and like a lot of Sonic games. Again, like in Big Board, I wish the level was just a bit longer, maybe an extra room or two. I only say that so they can capitalize on this mechanic they probably spent a fuck ton of time programming to get right, especially since they don't ever use it again past here. They even utilize most of Wario's base moveset, most noteworthy being the part where you're meant to turn into a ball on these slopes to outpace the dominoes. It's really cool that they use the ball form to encourage the player to take a harder but faster path during the escape sequence too. I really love the reactionary platforming the ball form is conducive to. It was my favorite parts of Wario Land 2 and 3, so it's great to see it capitalized on here so well. The only gripe I really have with the ball form is that it isn't used enough, but that's made up for by how well designed the ball sections that do exist in the game are. Something I really like about this level is that, at least in my playthrough, it was the first level I came across to have an area exclusively locked behind frog switch blocks. At the beginning of the level, you can see Keezer underneath 2 frog blocks and can recognize that you'll probably end up dropping down to whatever's below him in order to take him out of the stage. But what's a little unfortunate though is that the area below here is a bit lackluster. It doesn't even use the domino mechanic we've been playing with for the entire level. I'm guessing they didn't want to use a time-centric mechanic on top of another time-centric mechanic, but still, this area isn't that big. I think having the final challenge of the level culminate in the usage of the dominoes would have made it a complete package. They could have at least locked access to the last tablet behind the domino blocks and had you find the switch to topple them, but no, there's literally zero usage of anything used in the level in this final room here, which kinda stinks. Nah, you can never know with this shit though. Maybe they were pressed for time and had something going for this room, but it just wasn't working out, so they decided to scrap it. What's interesting to note here, I think, is that Big Board and Domino Row are sort of inverses of each other in terms of priority and design. Where Big Board introduces a mechanic beneficial to puzzle solving, Domino Row introduces a mechanic more apt for platforming. The two sides of the same coin are represented in the same world, and it makes me kinda wish the levels were back to back. Domino Row is definitely the better of the two, but it doesn't mean Big Board is a bad level by any means. These two levels' split priorities between platforming and puzzles can be used as a great example to this game's entire gameplay thesis. I know that sounds like some quasi-intellect shit because I used a word like thesis, but this whole game is about blending puzzles and you're blending it together. You're blending puzzles and You're blending it together! Another section of the game that echoes this back and forth balance between platforming and puzzles are the secret rooms, which can be accessed through these bright purple pipes scattered throughout the levels. These areas are completely optional and never have anything essential for completion in them, but they do contain 1,000 points worth of treasure, which is a pretty damn substantial amount considering there are multiple in a level. If you're going for a score run in a stage, these are all but required to make sure you score as high as you can. A lot of these rooms revolve around throwing the professor here, since he's the only object in the game that has the properties of an enemy but can't be killed. Unlike the rocks or glass orbs you can find in these areas sometimes, the professor can be jumped on top of to gain extra height and can't die. He's indisposable, making him a great resource for the designers to use. Like I said before, they have a good reason for him being here too. He's an archaeologist researcher, so it would make sense he'd be exploring the pyramid simultaneously to Wario. Actually, now that I think of it, it's sort of a similar idea to the one I came up with in Virtual Boy Wario Land, where I said it'd be cool if a separate character was exploring the same setting at the same time as Wario. For that game though, it would work best if utilized for the boss fights and combat aspects. Basically just giving Wario an adversary to butt heads with that isn't Mario. In this game though, all the characters inhabiting the same space as Wario are there for him to take advantage of in his own way. Whether that be abusing the professor to get around a secret room, or using the princess's services to get a leg up on bosses. I think that implicates a lot about Wario's character in a really subtle way. It's kinda cool. Back to these rooms though, I want a quick shot through some of my favorites to show off how they teeter back and forth between puzzles, platforming, or blending both. Let's cover some platforming ones first. Oh, by the way, I wish these rooms had fucking names attached to them so I could refer to them accurately. I have to say, there's this one, or in this room instead, which is gay. Anyway, there's this one where to get to the meat and potatoes of the room and reach the diamond at the end, you have to be in ball form. You need to be able to react to what's in front of you and jump to fill in the blocks to continue making progress through the room. It's a really simple challenge, but a really unique one at the same time. No other room in the game uses looping walls like this that I'm aware of, and I'm glad it was reserved for a rolling challenge. I also like that you can make your way to the diamond and miss some treasure that way if you don't explore all your options. There's a gap you can clear by jumping at the right time instead of filling in the blocks, which is fucking awesome too. I love having multiple solutions for easy challenges like that I should just be able to recognize. There's another really cool one where the platforms above a spike pit are laid in front of you when standing on these green tiles, but get hidden as soon as you step off. It forces the player to recognize what they saw, and punishing them for rushing or forgetting by making them fall into spikes. If you're going for a score run in a level, it's pretty important you finish the level with full health, as each heart is worth more points at the results screen. Having a challenge room have imminent danger for messing up platforming makes this pretty engaging for the players who want to get as much points as they can. I like that for the first couple platforms here, the wall that appears in front of them signify the platform's locations accurately, but the last few don't work the same. It punishes you again for relying on the crutch instead of analyzing your surroundings. These two secret room challenges can be done pretty fast depending on how much you know about what you're getting into. There isn't any waiting around for something to trigger or happen, unlike some of the puzzle-centric rooms. Often in rooms like this, it's waiting for the professor to walk somewhere for you to be able to use him. In this one though, you need to throw him into this pool of water so he'll sink to the bottom and trigger the switch to fill in the blocks you need to reach the diamond. The issue here though is that the platform you need to stand on before you jump up to the diamond is already filled in, meaning that when the professor triggers the switch, it'll disappear and you won't be able to reach the steps to the diamond. What you need to do is essentially race the sinking professor to the bottom of the room and jump at the right time to transfer platforms. If you're too slow to get to where you need to be, you won't even be able to jump up on the steps. If your reaction time on the jump between the two platforms is too slow, you'll miss your chance entirely. There's so many ways to mess up, and the thought process of the player might not even go towards throwing the professor in the water to begin with. On my initial playthrough, I tried to figure out if I could use the extra height I got from jumping on him to get to the diamond, but there's no way you'd be able to do that at all. There's only one solution. The fun of the game in these secret rooms more than half the time is figuring out what to do. It's that path optimization gameplay I was talking about earlier, but in the form of puzzle solving, and that's kinda cool. It's done really well, especially since there's seldom secret areas with multiple solutions. I know I just mentioned one with multiple solutions earlier, but that's the exception to the rule. It makes it so that when you do find one with multiple solutions, it's a pleasant surprise. I also like that they play with the properties of the professor as an object, which is evident especially in this room where you need to figure out you can throw him through spikes to get to the diamond. They even make use of the transformations in these areas, and they're honestly some of the best applications of them. There's a challenge room that has you forced to transform into Flat Wario to complete it, but you have to go slow and think carefully about where to throw this rock in the room with you in order to grant access to the diamond. It isn't particularly hard, but it is engaging, which is all these sections really need to be. The main challenge of the game comes from the levels themselves, so these act more like traditional bonus rooms if anything. You can even see them as a play on the treasure rooms from Wario Land 1 or Virtual Boy Wario Land. They grant you objects that add to your score, but make you work for them instead of granting you them for just finding the room. What's different about it in this game though is that these areas aren't particularly hard to get to or find half the time. Making the player work a bit to reap what's inside them makes sense. In the previous games, finding the room is the challenge, so the points are kind of like a gimme. In this one though, finding them is easy as fuck most of the time, so what's inside of them is the challenge, and I think that's cool. The only level I really want to talk about in the Sapphire Passage is Hotel Horror, but I honestly could talk about any of the levels in this world if I really wanted to. They're all great. Hotel Horror, though, is the only level in the game that really feels truly condensed, which makes sense because you're traveling inside a building. The architecture of the hotel you're in is completely squared off, but you can explore a bit of the outside stairwell too. The overall goal of the level is to travel around each floor of the hotel and make your way through each of its rooms either to progress or to up your score, but some of the rooms can be manipulated and changed based on your actions in other rooms. For example, passage to one room is locked behind these green blocks you can turn off, and once you do, you can access another section of the hotel you couldn't reach before. The boss tablets are a little hidden in plain sight in this level, but giving them to the player as a reward for exploring everything they can in the hotel works for a one-level deal. There's a lot going on in this stage to begin with, so much so that it's the only level with a map, so I don't really mind them not taking the time to meticulously hide the tablets like in other levels. As fitting of a setting a whorehouse is in Mario games for light puzzle solving, this level is actually more focused on platforming and maneuvering around than it is solving any difficult puzzles. There's a lot of memorizing what paths lead you to where in the hotel and how to platform around to get to where you need to be, which I guess could be considered the puzzle of the level, but there's a lot of just knowing where things are and how to get to them optimally anyway. I think this is actually the one level that used the most transformations at once. You have about 4 different times you need to use one here. You need to dodge the lights as Bat Wario to get higher up, you need to jump up accurately as Fire Wario to reach Keezer, and there's also Zombie Wario and Fat Wario too. Zombie Wario shows up in a previous level, but it's used more as something you're meant to avoid rather than utilize the properties of. You can't get any lower or loop back around from the position you're in once you get to this point in the level, and the only way you can get back to the beginning The only way you can get back to the beginning at that point is to use the zombie transformation to slip through the platforming, blocking you from going any lower. Again, it's really simple, but it's pretty effective. I wish I could say the same for Fat Wario here, though. There's a heavy block covering access to the frog switch here, and the only way you can break through it is to have the only enemy in the room transform you. This is kind of fucking stupid, though, because the same result could have been achieved if you just put a set of platforms here for me to jump on top with and allow me to ground pound through. As it is, the enemy is seemingly only here so they could fit another transformation in the level, but it's actually slower than if they were to just give me the height to ground pound through. The enemy being the solution of this room doesn't require any more critical thinking on part of the player, and it's just an overall clunkier potential solution to a progression gate that could have been easily circumvented if they just let me maintain flow and ground pound through the block! It's a puzzle I would expect from the likes of Wario Land 3, but not this game. That's why I'm upset. You could have done something a lot more interesting with, like, Flat Wario. Hell, you could have stripped it straight from Wario Land 2 if you were so insistent on using a similar puzzle. It would even work a lot better in this game since the physics of Flat Wario are way better. Anyway, it fucking sucks, whatever. Hitting the frog switch in this level poses an interesting challenge to the player to recall where each room leads all the way back to the beginning, but backwards. It's in contrast to most of the other levels where you can just leisurely rush your way back the way you came. It also helps there's a couple ways to do this, either by darting around rooms that'll take you back to the ground floor, or going outside of the stairwell and falling through as a zombie, perching you right next to the vortex. If you care at all about the secret CDs you can get, though, you can find the red door that opens upon pressing the frog switch and take on the challenge inside of it. Not only do you get to nab the CD, but you also get a shortcut to the bottom floor. It's one of the only levels in this game with so many ways to return to the entrance, and it might be even better if the timer wasn't 8 years long, making it one of the easiest escape sequences in the game. This level isn't the best in the Sapphire passage at all, but it definitely has a lot going for it and against it, which makes it a more interesting discussion than other levels. I also had to restrain myself from picking the Arabian Nights level, at risk of making more secret rings comparisons. I don't have a lot to say about the levels in the Ruby passage. They weren't my favorite to play, but they all had something cool about them at the same time. Curious Factory is too short and doesn't take advantage of Flat Wario enough. It mostly uses him to cross 1 block wide gaps under ceilings that normal Wario can, instead of using his fall arc. It also does that shit that some games do, where the camera has to follow you 100% of the time, so when you make a jump, it pans up to keep you in frame, but obscures the platform you were aiming for in the first place. Jesus Christ, I mean, we figured this shit out by now, right? This is mostly a problem in, like, shovelware or, like, older games, but on the Game Boy Advance? I mean, I guess the screen is really small, but god damn, man, we got a game like Attack of the Rhinox on here. You'd think a game like that, with a kind of overhead camera, would be really horrible on a small-ass handheld, especially with how close it is to Spyro, but it works perfectly. There isn't a single time the camera's blocking something important. It keeps everything within the player's immediate vision all at once. No matter how small the screen is, there's no reason these platforms in this level couldn't have been shaped up to avoid this. There isn't a single other part in Wario Land 4 like this too, which makes it even worse. Maybe Attack of the Rhinox isn't the best comparison to go with here considering the difference in how these two games' cameras function, but they're occupying the same space on the screen, so that shouldn't even matter. This whole leap of faith shit in games is infuriating. This is the kind of shit Braid makes fun of. Then again, the whole game's a joke, so.
It looked like Mario in the future.
The level sort of makes up for it by having some of my favorite secret rooms in the game, and it also has that really cool robot background I talked about earlier. So, you know, whatever, it's alright. Toxic Landfill has a bunch of rooms with nothing but destructible blocks in it. It made me think there was a bonus room hidden behind some of them, but there never was. It's really strange, there's literally no reason for there to be so many empty rooms designed like this, but they did it anyway. It's uncharacteristically lazy of this game, which is really disappointing. It's graphically one of my favorites in the game though, and even if it's lazy to just have a bunch of destructibles in the way for no reason, it is satisfying to plow through them. I guess they were meaning for Wario to be like a sort of compactor for the trash here, just leveling all this garbage to get through, which is kinda cool. So, you know, it's alright. 40 Below Fridge is the most soundly designed of the three mentioned so far, but it's way too long, and the process of figuring out how to use Snowball Wario to progress throughout the level isn't satisfying. This is mostly due in part to the level's confusing layout not prioritizing guiding the player, which is kind of important when designing a level where progression is meant to be blocked off, but it isn't so bad on repeated playthroughs. It's really only annoying on your first pass. With all this in mind, you'd think Ruby Passage would be the most okay part of the game, but fuck you, this world has the pinball level, it's fucking great!
Pinball!
It's not even the best level in the game, but it's just good enough to where it makes me look back at the levels that come before it to note things more positively about them. The entire level takes place in a pinball machine, and it's one of the only levels in the game that has a massive focus on throwing things and other more underused states like climbing. I know I've really been going on and on and on about how this game fuses jumping around and puzzles, but this level is the most standout example of this. You're supposed to take these pinballs and throw them into all the compartments to open the path to the next room, but sometimes they're hidden in obtuse places you need to figure out how to get to. Wario has a lot of properties attached to each of his moves that go without focus within the design of the stages, and I feel like this level was meant to circumvent that. Like I said before, there's a bunch of climbing sections, but you can also make stationary objects bounce with his ground pound, either bouncing them to where they need to be or towards him to grab, which is basically what this whole level is. Between each room that houses pinballs, you need to travel through an in-between section, connecting the main rooms together. Often in these rooms, you need to roll into a ball to pass through, like a pinball, and I really like that attention to detail. I kinda think they don't go far enough with it though, to be honest. It would be really cool if there were paddles you could fall onto in these rooms that keep you in ball form. You gotta like push the jump button to have it fling you, it's like Sonic 2. There aren't a lot of levels in this game that require you to throw objects, except for like the bosses, which is weird considering it's such a selling point and integral feature of Wario's moveset. But having a level focus entirely on that aspect of Wario, while also melding exploration around and figuring out what makes each area crack with no transformation bullshit, is really fucking refreshing. It's great, I love it. This was the last level I played in the game before I went on to the final area, so it made it really memorable for me. It's also probably my absolute favorite looking level in the game. I fucking love the art of all the creatures and like robots on the wall, cool text graphics everywhere. It makes me want to see a real pinball machine with this aesthetic, instead of the, like usual dumb neon carny bullshit you see. It's an awesome level, which is funny considering how much I don't give a fuck about pinball. Have you seen these fucking stupid pinball machine games? Not like fucking like Space Cadet, I mean like new shit. I never knew this was a thing until I saw it on my Switch for like $1, but there's like this weird subsect of like crossover pinball games where you can listen to like Bob's Burgers audio while you play pinball. Hey, did you know the same artist behind Bob's Burgers did Sanjay and Craig? I bet you did! Pinball isn't even that fun digitally. Fucking let alone in real life. Isn't the fun of pinball in real life shaking the fuck out of the machine to keep going even if you think you'll fuck up? What good is having a shake feature in my pinball game if all it takes is pushing R2? I'm a scrawny fuck, so I can't even manage to shake a machine even slightly to reap good results. The last time I did that was with a vending machine when my hot Cheetos got stuck. It takes fucking zero brain power for me to push a button to accomplish the same task on a controller. And I always turn off Sonic Adventure at that pinball part. And there's all these fucking useless pinball games from all these different companies. They're all basically the same game with a different coat of paint. And all I'm really doing is watching a ball bounce back and forth. This doesn't give me the same kind of dopamine I did watching the same thing happen on the basketball court. So you know what? I think I actually hate this level now. Pinball's fucking stupid. All in all, the quality of all the levels are sort of all over the place, but it isn't so bad since the way the game's structured just allows you to move on to another level if you aren't feeling the one you're currently on. It also helps that Wario is so fun to play as in this game. Like 75% of the fun factor in this game comes from how good it feels to shoulder bash shit and run around as this top cat fuck. Additionally, I have a feeling the structure of the world map and how it works came after the designing phase of the levels. They probably had them all done and laid out and maybe felt it would be rough on the player to force them through each level if they didn't like just one. It makes more sense to give the player as many options as they could so they didn't risk people dropping the game, which would be especially embarrassing because it's so short. Subtract my own empty-headedness from the equation and you can definitely beat this in like 6 hours, but that's not really a bad thing. My favorite kinds of games are bite-sized experiences like this. They're really replayable and easy to squeeze out all you like about them. Honestly, if it were any longer, like if there was like an extra world or something, I might call this game a drag, but as it is, it's kind of the perfect length. But I'm not done talking about this game yet, because I haven't even gotten to the best part! The bosses! Wario Land 4 has 6 bosses in total. As I've said a million times before, this game was directed by Matsuoka, so you'd think the bosses would lean towards functioning like they did in Virtual Boy Wario Land. What ends up actually happening though is they go for a mixture of how they worked in that game and the original. It's like they took a look at how all the bosses worked in all the previous games and just took the best bits of what was there and left out anything else. They really learned their lesson from Wario Land 2 and 3. And by that I mean to say they took nothing from how those bosses work, because they suck. In Wario Land 1, 2, and 3, you would face bosses at the end of levels or during the middle of levels, but like Virtual Boy Wario Land 4 puts bosses in their own dedicated levels. They take up a level slot in the world, but are nothing more than an arena for you to fight in. The bosses in Virtual Boy Wario Land are programmed in strict cycles, making it really obtuse to extend your advantage in the fight. I mean, it's definitely possible, but whenever you can do it, it doesn't feel intentional. Like, it feels like an oversight that the boss's hurt box was still active whenever you could hit them more than once in a cycle. This is the opposite of Wario Land 1, where the bosses were strictly designed to capitalize on what you knew about them and how many hits you can get in based on that. This is the kind of boss design Wario Land 4 evolves on, but in the way where it blends both what the Virtual Boy game offered and the original. If Wario Land 1 is focused on giving the player control of the fight, Virtual Boy is focused on giving the boss control, and Wario Land 2 and 3 are too busy eating pace, Wario Land 4 has all it needs to split the control perfectly. They blended the two together in a really smart way. On a first-time playthrough of a boss, both the player and the boss are at an equal advantage. Advantages are swayed to each party based on what the player knows about what they're meant to do, what moves to use to damage the boss, where to hit the boss, etc, etc. You're never at an initial disadvantage with a boss on a blind run, since every boss's beginning phases are within comfortable parameters. This is obvious shit, but none of them have like one-hit kill moves they can use on you or anything. Anyway, your task in a boss is to always find their weak point and how to hit it. Once you figure that out, you're now in advantage and can start trying to hit the boss. After you've gotten a hit on them, they attempt to take the advantage from you by starting their turn to attack. And then, you gotta like, push the buttons on the controller to not get hit and shit, Now usually on your first time through, you take the hit you got on the boss as a win and assume you can't extend further than that. You'd just try to get as many one hits as you can until the boss is over, and you can totally do that in this game and be fine. What you'll soon end up realizing though is that every boss is set up so their weak point is still immediately vulnerable after your first hit, meaning if you're quick enough you can repeat the same action and hit them again. It's all about optimizing your movement so that you can reset the boss into their getting hurt animation over and over after hitting them. It's entirely possible, and in all but one case definitely intentional. If you do it perfectly, you can repeat this process over and over and catch the boss in a loop where you refuse to let them finish their animation. The reason you'd want to do this is because if they finish their animation at all, they now have their turn to attack and control of the pace, which sucks for you. The only bosses this doesn't apply to are Kumar Condor over here and the final boss, but they still sort of fall under the same umbrella, which we'll get into in a bit. The bosses in this game have a lot of replayability with all this in mind, which goes hand in hand with the rest of the game's replayable aspects. You can one-cycle every boss without ever getting hit or getting put in disadvantage, but again, it's fucking hard, even if you're not trying to game the system and just play the boss normally. What makes this idea so important, and the bosses even harder, is that all of them are on a time limit. The more time you take to kill a boss, the less treasure you'll get for beating them, which means a worse ending. And you want the good ending, okay? This time limit not only forces the player to work under a tense environment, but also encourages them to take advantage of the boss in any way they can, whether it be through extending their hits or using the item shop. Before every boss, you can enter this item shop run by Shakura and buy shit that'll damage the boss for you at the beginning of the fight. They all have fun little animations too, which is a nice touch. You can also buy a free smile! It's completely up to the player whether or not they want to use any of these items in the first place, which is really cool. It's another risk versus reward thing. Not buying an item rewards you with the satisfaction that you did it without any extra help or a crutch, but that in turn puts the player at risk of losing treasure for taking too long. What's a little unfortunate about these items though is that some of them completely trivialize these fights. Each item does a specific amount of damage on each boss, and if you just happen to buy one that does the most amount of damage on the boss you're about to face, it can completely ruin any challenge that comes from the fight. Like Black Dog does 10 points of damage to Catbat, and it puts him down to like 2 bits of health. Makes the fight a complete waste. I don't know why they implemented these super damaging items at all, especially since the rest of the items only do like 2 to 5 damage per boss, which is completely reasonable. It makes more sense from a designer's aspect not to include items that'll basically beat the boss for you, right? Like, you put all this work into programming these boss patterns and making assets for them, so it seems weird to develop a system around allowing the player to completely avoid experiencing them. But I don't fucking know, I'm not a game designer. Anyway, it's a little weird you can't buy these items with the treasure you get in gameplay now that I think about it. It would give the treasure a pretty practical usage. You could even sort of develop a weird economy between how expensive each item is, how much you want to spend your treasure, and how much treasure there are in levels to begin with. I think that could work really well with the kind of games the Wario Land series is. It would be like an alternative to the gambling minigames from the original. This game doesn't have lives, so implementing a similar system where instead of spending treasure on life security, you spend it on an easier time on bosses is cool. And you know what? Giving the player the option to make the game easier at the cost of a possible worse ending is super cool. The only problem with this is that the treasure is almost exclusively used for the score of levels. It doesn't even affect the ending you get at all. The ending is affected only by the amount of chests you get after defeating a boss and has nothing to do with the total amount of treasure you've collected between levels, which is weird, especially since there's already a counter for that shit. Yeah, you spend treasure to play mini games in this game, which in turn gives you coins to buy the items at the shop. So strange, why not just cut out the middleman? And honestly, I don't know, like, these little WarioWare games kinda suck. Like, it's a cool idea to play little micro games to earn currency to help you with the boss, but there's literally nothing correlating the two. The games have nothing to do with the boss, and the boss has nothing to do with the games. They don't even affect each other in any way, not even thematically. It works as a fun sort of prototype to WarioWare, but if they were so adamant about not spending the treasure you get in levels, why not design a way to get currency that trains you in the same skills you would use in the boss fights? I'm imagining some sort of Kirby True Arena thing. Maybe you have to fight a bunch of waves of enemies or unique mini-bosses that the more you go through, the more money you get to use in the shop or something. It would make sense to have the player practice their offensive options and pattern recognition skills in a mode like this, while also rewarding them with a way to take less time on the bosses, but maybe that's counterintuitive. The only alternative I can think of is being rewarded items that make the fights harder but give more treasure or something, but that would only work if the treasure contributed to the ending you get. I don't know, the minigames themselves are also pretty boring to play. The only one that's really any fun is Wario Roulette, but that's only because you can make Wario burst in it. Wario Hop is fucking weird also. I feel like the hitbox on the wheel is like fucked up or something, because I can never get past the part where you're supposed to jump over the professor. I think implementing something where currency is gained through the main gameplay style would just be a lot more fun in general too, because duh, the best parts of this game are where you get to play as Wario. As it is, it's just kinda here as a fun side thing, but attaching it to such an integral mechanic feels weird. There's no reason you can just find the currency in the levels hidden away or something too, but it's fine, whatever. Back on the actual bosses, the Emerald Passage boss, Cractus, might be my favorite in the game. He perfectly shows off that balancing act between keeping yourself an advantage to extend how much damage you can do, and how devastating it can be to give the boss a chance. His advantage state has him rolling through 3 different attacks, and getting hit by one of them can make his turn even longer, costing you almost 30 seconds in a 4-minute battle. Normally something like this would be a huge arbitrary annoyance, but since the whole game of Wario Land 4's bosses is being as efficient as you can be, punishment for fucking up being wasting your time actually makes sense for once. Eat my shit, Wario Land 3.
Bombs away, boy, bitch!
Touching the jewel that drips from Cractus's mouth in this fight turns Wario into a useless zombie. A firefly will buzz on the screen that'll let you transform back if you catch it, but if you freak out and don't assess the situation quick enough, it's likely you'll be too slow to get to it. He'll fly away off screen, meaning you have to wait for him again, obviously wasting more time. Wasting more time means having less opportunities to hit the boss, and having less opportunities to hit the boss means you might not beat him fast enough to get all 3 chests. All this will only happen if you get hit by the jewel. The cool thing about this fight though is that overextending your hits, as difficult as it is, puts you at a higher risk of getting hit by the jewel than just getting one hit on him would. Every aspect of this fight directly plays on each other to make messing up a tension increase, and these bosses are already tense as is with their difficulty and timer. The risk-reward attribute of extending how much damage you can do is great here too. You definitely want to do as much damage as quick as you can, maybe even try to get the boss in a loop, but if you make the slightest misinput or time something off, you'll fight a boss again. You'll fight 2 bosses. It's up to the player to know their limits on what they can do so they don't waste any more time than they need to, risking a worse chess pool. The optimized version of this boss makes it look like a joke, but it's ridiculously hard. Not only do you have to space yourself to where you won't miss your ground pound, still hit his head, and not fall into the path of his jewel, but also time your initial hit so he rises at a distance where it's possible to reach him from the ladder. It's borderline pixel perfect, but damn, it's such a good challenge. I can only hit him twice, maybe 3 times on a single cycle, and even then I used Visor Man for this fight, so he had way less health. Even despite that though, I almost didn't beat it on my first go. I let him hit me way too many times on his last hit, and we both ended up with 1 more bit of health left on us, raising the tension even higher. I was also like a minute away from losing a treasure, which would've sucked because I want a good ending, okay? This boss is great. I might even say it's my favorite in the series next to the final boss in the original game. It's a super tough and memorable challenge, which is all it really needs to be. In fact, all these bosses are memorable in some way, whether it be through their design or the way you fight them. Like for example, the Topaz Passage boss, Aerodent. His design isn't anything too interesting, he's just a flying teddy bear being controlled by a mouse, and to be honest, he isn't really even that great of a fight, but he's probably the easiest boss to extend on, which is really satisfying to do right. His whole thing is wasting your time because you're only able to hit him when he lets you, so honestly, if you don't extend at least once or twice, you might not get all the chests without using an item. Once you flip him over and the little mouse pops out of his head, you can shoulder bash his head over and over if you time it right so he never flies back up to the top of the screen. It's really satisfying to do all in one go, but messing up makes the boss way harder since past a certain damage threshold, He'll start throwing fire on the ground where you need to be to hit him, which transforms you. If you don't capitalize and one-cycle him, you're gonna end up wasting a ton of time trying to finagle a hit on him, which maybe isn't very fun, but it is satisfying to conquer if it gets to that. With the Ruby Passage boss, Cuckoo Condor, you need to get him in his second phase so he can give you an alternative way to hit him now that you broke his armor. He does this by supplying you with eggs that you can catch and throw upwards onto the tip of his head to deal damage, but if you miss the catch on the egg, it'll hatch onto the ground as a little chick you need to deal with. Killing the chick with a shoulder bash will give Condor just enough time to hatch another egg you need to catch, but since you're likely dealing with the chick on the other side of the screen, it has a high chance of landing on the ground. If this cycle repeats, the floor will quickly get filled with chicks, and it'll be really hard for you to position yourself in a way where you can catch the eggs to throw them back. It can get really overwhelming really fast, but if you run out of time on this boss and obtain the hindsight for the next try, it's all just a matter of catching every egg he throws at you. Jesus, sound like a fucking GameFAQs guide. When I say this boss functions differently than the others, I mean that you're not really taking advantage of his animations to extend your hits, but rather playing to his actions to hit him consistently. There is no loop to pull off on this boss, it's mostly just making sure no eggs hit the floor so you have less trouble to deal with, which is completely dependent on the player's skill. The more trouble there is to deal with, the more likely you are to miss a hit, and the more likely you are to miss a hit, the more you waste time. You get it. I think it's cool because the rate at which Condor spits out eggs is set. It never speeds up or slows down to trip you up. It's static. It's all up to whether or not you can maintain that pace, which is a cool way of designing an alternatively functioning boss in a game like this. The final boss works the same way. During the first phases, the diva will throw things at you that you need to throw back to deal damage. Some of the things she throws won't hurt her just by being thrown and can't even be picked up to throw back. Like, she'll throw a hammer that won't do anything when thrown back at her, so you need to throw it up and hit yourself with it to turn into a spring to hit her. Or she'll throw a heavy ball you need to shoulder bash that'll bounce off the walls and hit her at an angle. I like that you can take something she throws at you and use it to get rid of another thing she sent out. It gives the player the option to ease their ground if they're getting overwhelmed, but wastes time overall. The boss is all about, again, consistently keeping up with the rate at which she tosses shit at you, but also being able to react to what she's throwing at you to hurt her in a timely fashion. What's cool about her boss specifically is that all the chests you've gotten thus far are on the line here, so it can be pretty stressful to see a full wall of chests up for loss. It's a really cool way to evolve the tension. Her last phase is also cool. You finally unmask her and she gets enraged and will start destroying the ground where you stand in attempts to hit you. It took me a second to realize what to do and I fucking sat up in my chair to figure it out. It made my heart sink. The only really unfortunate thing about these two bosses is that there's a ton of hair on my mic. Oh my god. They're kinda piss easy since there's only one thing that makes them crack, unlike Cractus where the game is asking a lot of you, or Aerodent where one mess up wastes a ton of time. They're fine bosses, but honestly I felt a little underwhelmed by the diva fight. It felt too short in a way, like not extravagant enough compared to everything you did to get to this point. I really do like that you have to transform yourself to hit her though, and I'll admit it is really satisfying to punch her lips with a shoulder bash to end the game. So yeah, even the bosses that don't have the same challenge to most of them offer a valid enough alternative under the same design idea. The only boss I can say for a fact doesn't do any of this is Catbat. Catbat isn't a bad boss or anything, if anything he's just a bit boring, but they had a perfectly good opportunity to make him function like the other bosses, but I don't know, something went wrong. He looks great, I love his design and sprite work a ton, but his fight is definitely the most undercooked in the game. You're meant to shoulder bash jump off these waves he sends to hit the top of his head, and you'd think you'd be able to return to the wave quick enough to hit him again before he does another attack, but no. The waves travel across the screen too fast to be able to have the same angle on your shoulder bash jump to hit him again. You can hit him earlier than intended by shoulder bash jumping as he goes down to make a wave, but the timing is pretty strict. Once you hit him enough times to get rid of the bat on his head, you're meant to ground pound his head as he comes by, but you can just jump on his head as soon as it happens and push him into a corner. Then you just gotta keep ground pounding until he dies. It's really weird. It's the only one that doesn't feel intentional, and I guess that might be because of how easy it is to pull off? I don't know. It doesn't seem like the way they wanted you to do this compared to like Cractus. I know I've been describing fucking speedrunner tier tricks this whole time, but all of this tech is completely within the capability of someone who's played the game at least once before. The skill gap isn't so huge. This Catbat fight definitely feels like an exploit compared to the rest of the bosses, but maybe if you can do it at all, it was intended. Even though some of the bosses aren't as good as others, their highest highs trump the highs of the previous games, and they never dip as low as the lowest lows of the previous games. They're definitely my preferred bosses in the whole series. There's just a couple of things surrounding them, like the whole boss item system or the way the endings work. I think they could have revised to make everything about them perfect. As they are though, they're fun as fuck to play and get better at, which is all you could really ask for bosses in your platformer on the Game Boy! This is all to say that this game is definitely the best in the series, which isn't a surprise at all. It's no wonder people tout this as one of the best Nintendo games, because it's definitely a contender. It evolves on all the previous games in clever ways that solidify those games as stepping stones to a peak in the series. It has a progressed version of Wario Land 1's movement and bosses, Virtual Boy Wario Land's split exploration and platforming nature is expanded upon, and all the transformations in 2 and 3 are improved through the engine of the game. You know, it's no Sute Hakun though, so Wario Land 4 is far from perfect, but there's a lot here that makes up for that at the same time. I wish some of the levels were better, but the good ones outweigh the bad ones. I wish there was more reason for the side modes existing, but they're not necessary for completion, so you can avoid them. I wish some of the moveset was better utilized consistently, but Wario's fun to play as regardless. This game isn't unpolished by any means, but I think an extra layer of polish would do this game a lot of good. I'm only looking at this under such an intense magnifying glass compared to the other games because it's so good and because it does so much right. It isn't like the other games where there's something fundamentally wrong with the way they're structured like in 2 and 3 that almost dissolve them of this kind of standard. A lot of this doesn't matter though, since Wario's just so fun to play as, which was the most important thing to get right. Speaking of the previous entries, it turns out all of the previous directors had some developmental correlation to this game. Kiyotaka and Hosokawa acted as additional designers, meaning this is the last time that all 3 previous Wario directors would work on a game together. In fact, this game acts as their last prominent developmental role in any Nintendo game. They shifted towards being supervisors, artists, or just straight up dropped out of the industry entirely after this game in WarioWare. The most disappointing of the bunch being Matsuoka's departure, in my opinion. He officially left the company in 2005, but would continue working with Nintendo up until 2018 on useless shit like Personal Trainer Walking or Detective fucking Pikachu. It's weird to think about, really. He'd been working at the company since it started, and his earliest works include huge games like the original Metroid, Balloon Fight, and Kid Icarus. To think this guy who has all these credits on these classic games has no hand in anything recent going on in the company, and was stuck making these stupid games no one talks about outside of the novelty of them in his late years is a bit upsetting. But I don't know. Maybe it was relaxing for the guy to not have to worry about making these big, groundbreaking games anymore. He probably had fun designing Personal Trainer Walking for all I know. It's definitely got that old Nintendo charm to it. I was reading an interview with Matsuoka on Wario Land 4, and he said his interpretation of Wario is that of a dedicated treasure hunter. I feel like this is kind of the end of that era in a way. Disregarding Shake It, every inclusion of Wario after this point has him taking the role of a grotesque tycoon who, like, farts or something. In any case, they all really went out working together with, like, a bang. Or like a boom. They did a good job. This game's great, and it's definitely worth your time. It was the last Wario Land game for a while, and it took them like 7 years to make a new one, and it ended up just being okay. It's mediocre!
Mediocre?
Come on, pick it up and play it.
I'm not going to talk about this game too long because there's honestly not that much to say, but Wario Land Shake It's a Wii game that came out in 2007, made by fucking Goodfeel. The game has no one from the original 5 games contributing to the development in any way, not even in supervising or programming roles. This is because Goodfeel is an entirely new staff made up of former Konami employees, specifically from the Kobe studio. Didn't that guy die in like a plane crash? You think if he didn't, he would have been in Space Jam 2? Rick and Morty were in Space Jam 2, did you guys see that? I mentioned before how the staff might have added to the game's lackluster quality, which I stand by, but there's some genuine talent over at Goodfeel coming over from Konami, don't get me wrong. They have a track record of interesting games under their belt, like Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Goemon on N64, and Rakuga Kids. It's a game I pretend to like. They also made like a Mickey Mouse dancing game? The Kobe branch of Konami eventually dissolved into the Tokyo branch in 2002, which I'm sure saw the leave of a bunch of prominent devs, leading to the formation of Goodfeel. These guys probably didn't want to be stuck making fucking DDR games until the end of time. Jesus Christ, Konami! There were like 12 DDR games made after Kobe got dissolved. What's the point in playing a game like this on a controller anyway? I recently played DDR Supernova 2 on a real cabinet, and it was fucking awesome feeling that game click with how you're supposed to play it. Why the fuck would I ever play DDR any other would eventually end up forming their own studio partnered with Nintendo. It seems like they were all pretty dedicated to making the games they did. There's a couple of really ambitious looking games under their portfolio, especially this one called Gun Gauge. I really dig the look and feel of. Good Feel definitely isn't made up of the same people it was when it started, but now they make games like Kirby's Epic Yarn and Yoshi's Woolly World or whatever. Lots of things that fall into that kind of cutesy craft aesthetic. Shake It's an early project from Good Feel, so they weren't really settled into that style yet, but honestly, as iffy as I am on Shake It's presentation, it's so much better than what they do now. I'm just not a huge fan of the softness of their later games, especially in Epic Yarn where it directly correlates to the difficulty and fun factor of that game. Shake It, on the very least, had an idea to its visual style I can resonate with, but that just comes down to personal taste. They do end up reusing a lot of sound effects from Shake It to Kirby, but whatever, who cares? They decided to go for a hand-drawn style for the character sprites in Shake It, and I think it really pays off in setting the game apart. Apparently they were toying around with the idea of making the game have 3D graphics before settling on this, but damn, good on them. This kind of shit isn't cheap, especially considering they hired a ton of talent from studios like Production IG to do the key animation on the characters. It definitely would have been more cost efficient to just model and rig all the characters out and animate them that way, but going for a hand-drawn style definitely sets this game apart from most platformers on the Wii for sure. You know, except like Rayman Origins, which I think you should definitely play instead. I did a little research on the animators involved and didn't find too much of anything interesting. I don't care much for most of the anime these guys have worked on, that or I've just never heard of them. It is cool they had some animators off Dead Leaves working on this though, that movie kicks ass. It might have been worth it to get a different art director for the style of this game though, because that all being said, I'm really not a fan of this game's presentation. I don't want to imply they spent all their budget on good talent to get the cutscenes and character sprites right, but almost every other presentation aspect of this game is lacking. For starters, these level backgrounds and tile sets are really bland. I get they were going for like a painterly look, but it really just doesn't work, probably because not a lot of work went into making sure they did it right. I know I just brought up Rayman Origins, but I think that game's a good example of doing this kind of art direction right. The character animation in Origins isn't frame by frame, hand-drawn though, but do you really care that much when you're in the thick of playing it? It's a good-ass game. I'm not a huge fan of how the character sprites tween around, but it looks good for what it is. Shake It feels like it was really pushing for proper implementation of this style of animation, but again, I don't really care when I'm playing it. And I'm not having fun to begin with, so I just end up nitpicking. Shit like this doesn't end up mattering unless the rest of your game's artistic presentation is equally as sound, and when the locales are as bland as they are, there's a glaring issue here. They all have this really faded look to them that adds nothing to the aesthetic I'm assuming the game is pushing for. It's really sterile, and there's nothing interesting going on, especially with the color choice. I say assuming because I'm not even really sure what the game is going for. I guess they're trying to go for like a papery, treasure mappy look with the texturing and brushwork they did on these assets, but aside from the world map, nothing is really supporting that. It's not something like, let's say, like Cuphead, where it has an aesthetic it's pushing for from the very beginning, and every attribute and choice made relating to its presentation is adding to that. To do hand-drawn animation for your platformer game is kind of a tall order though, so I'll give them a bit of a break on this. While they might have had Nintendo's budget going into this, they also had Nintendo's schedule. It's not like they're an indie studio and could just take as much time as they want. There's deadlines to this shit, something Studio MDHR doesn't really have to worry about making Cuphead. Also, maybe comparing it to the literal peak of hand-drawn animation in platformers isn't fair, but I don't know, why not? They decided on this style pretty early into development, so you'd think they'd make sure they covered all their bases into making this look really good, so I think it deserves some criticism. It's the part of the game people unanimously say is the best about it, but honestly, it didn't do much for me. It just feels a bit directionless. Like, they had a really good idea for the character animation, but everything else was just an afterthought. But even then, as much credit as I'm giving to the character animation, it's nothing too special in terms of flair. They're really misunderstanding what made each Wario Land game's artistic style so appealing, especially with the proportions of Wario himself. Compare this to every other Wario Land, and you can tell that the person in charge of designing the characters had a different idea of how Wario should be represented. In Shake It, he just sort of looks like Wario. There isn't much setting him apart from how he looks in every other Mario spin-off he's in. But maybe this isn't the designer's fault. This game was made during the time where Nintendo really started to be anal about artistic expression of their characters in their game, so maybe it was gonna look more unique, but they ended up changing it. I don't know. I really just don't like how he looks in-game here. Every other game has him kinda stout and small, almost chibi-ish, but still depicted his macho-ness properly with his animations, but keeping his goofiness intact with his expressions. There really isn't any of that in Shake It. He holds this one face the entire time, and it's boring. His proportions are at least consistent, but again, that's just really boring. If anything, I'd appreciate if they were a little less consistent. There's rare moments of this, but they're so few and far between with Wario, the character himself, that you get more personality out of these bare-bones enemies. I don't know, maybe I'm being too hard on the art in this game, but really, it's not all that. I play a lot of stylized games, so maybe I just refuse to settle for what I view as less.
What the hell is this? Looks like Las Vegas.
You know, I actually kind of like this stuff.
I'm just not a fan of how everything interacts with each other stylistically, or perhaps the lack of interaction between everything. No, just look at this fucking screen. Why am I playing this in 4x3? What purpose is there in making the HUD look like this? I get they want to show the player their missions at all times to make sure they keep them in mind, but then we get into a gameplay issue. A lot of the time, you can't even complete all these missions in one playthrough of a level, so there's really no point to have them all designated on the screen at the same time this way, especially if it's going to give me more tunnel vision than the GoldenEye intro. No, no, no! Ah! I really see no reason for this to be a thing in the first place. Why would I want arbitrary replayability like this? It's like a fucking mobile game. I'm not playing Angry Birds, I'm playing Wario. You're making me angry. You're just filling each level with these menial and sometimes even annoying tasks for me to complete for the sake of encouraging me to play a level over again. Well, newsflash, good feel. I want to replay the levels if they're fun anyway. Nah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, just HUD is fucking stupid. There's no reason you couldn't have just taken these stupid borders away, kept the treasure and mission icons in their place, and moved the health and score to the corners of the screen. I'm usually not a stickler for shit like this. I think all those 16:9 mods for classic Sonic games are kinda stupid, but this is a modern platformer in 2007. It's never an issue in gameplay. Like, I never find myself calling bullshit on a challenge because of the screen size, but it's just a bizarre choice. There's no reason for it. There are fucking GameCube games that have widescreen options. What the hell is this game's excuse? Anyway, back to the backgrounds and tile sets. I will say I do like that the overall color palette of the screen you're on reflects in the lighting and overlay on the character sprites. It's a nice touch. I know I just complained about the colors earlier, and these are still really ugly, but I really just like this overlay. It's especially apparent in closed-off areas. It's a little detail I'm glad they thought to include. You know, this whole game style kind of reminds me of Spelunky. But like a diet Spelunky. They both got this like squared off grid-based structure to the levels, and they're both going for a similar look. Every interactable sprite has a stark outline over it to make sure they stand out in both games, but Shake It continues that into the borders of the foreground, and it looks really jarring, whereas Spelunky doesn't. I think Spelunky does its presentation better, obviously. In fact, I kinda wish Shake It just looked like Spelunky altogether, down to the character proportions. You could get away with modding Wario into Spelunky 2 and passing it off as a new Wario land. Hell, just make it look like the characters in that new WarioWare. That's a nice balance between something that looks 2D that's actually a 3D model. They even got the shoulder bash in there already. The music in this game is also boring. I don't think I remember a single song on the entire tracklist, and I definitely wouldn't be able to hum any of them to you. Like, it's structurally sound, it's not abhorrent to listen to or anything, but nothing about any of the tracks says anything about the level you're in or the game you're playing. Wario Land 4 has kind of the same issue, but they're constantly doing weird things with the sound design and music implementation that makes up for it. Shake It just has some repeating loops with a ton of obnoxious instrumentation. The composer, Tomoya Tomida, doesn't really have that much of an exemplary background. I think his position at Goodfeel was more just for him to finally make some actual game soundtracks. You know, like, be a composer on a project. I'm sure he'd much rather be doing what he's doing now than doing the sound design on Animaniacs on SNES. That's a thankless job. In any case, I'm really not so impressed with his work. It's serviceable, but honestly not even worth bringing up. The only reason I did was so I could wrap up the presentation segment to solidify my opinion that it's just okay. Kinda like the gameplay. The whole gimmick of Shake It is that you jerk off the Wiimote really hard to shake things. The more you shake shit, the more shit'll come out.
Shake, shake.
You shake enemies to kill them and get health, and you shake bags of treasure to make money spill out, and that's about it. That's all you really do with the shaking. You don't even use it in any of the bosses minus the last one, which, thank God. The shaking is really boring. There's really nothing to it. You'd think there'd be puzzle stuff like shaking an enemy to change the state it's in so you can complete a challenge, but no. Like maybe shaking a red enemy until it's blue so it can cross a bridge that only blue enemies can to flip a switch or something. I don't know, anything. It's literally only ever used to maximize the amount of treasure you can get out of a bag, but At that rate, it's just slowing down gameplay where you could take the mechanic out and it would be better. It would be cooler if the shaking was analog, like if you shook the Wiimote slower, you'd get a different effect and animation than if you were to shake it as hard as you could. As it is, you can only do the latter, no matter how gentle the movement, and I think they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot here with this. Granted, I can't really think of any Wii games that do something like that, so maybe they considered it, but it didn't end up panning out. In any case, though, they're simplifying this potentially cool mechanic that could be used for so many cool puzzles just for the sake of brevity. It's lame as hell. The Wii's a cool console. It's got a bunch of games that take advantage of its characteristics in unique ways. What's this game's excuse? Every aspect of being on the Wii this game uses is so surface level and never applied to anything engaging. It makes the game a huge slog. Should have called it Wario Land Aim It, because there's more aiming in this game than there is shaking, which I'm honestly thankful for. At the very least, the idea of using the tilt controls for aiming is a cool evolution of the throw mechanic from the previous games. It's definitely more involved than shaking just by virtue, so. There's a fuck ton of potential application of this too. I'm imagining things like precision aiming and throw timing being key in solving a puzzle or reaching a treasure while on a track. Or maybe throwing different types of enemies at a wall doesn't kill them, but makes them more hostile or something. You could even have that aspect sometimes be needed to solve a puzzle. There's a ton you could do. However, this game, unfortunately just like the shaking, resorts to the easiest option on all fronts. There's a block on the wall, and you need to aim and hit it to pass through to progress. Do it. It's just fucking boring. The only thing that could make this worse is if Wario had a little companion that spoke like 18 lines of dialogue about how to throw shit every time you did it. Oh wait, they already did that. I wish Shake It took more pages out of Yoshi's Island or something. That game does this same idea really well, and it makes a lot of sense just looking at the game side by side. This was even brought up in an interview with the devs, but they said they didn't even think about it during development. What? It never once occurred to you guys you could have referenced one of the most popular Nintendo platformers that also has a central mechanic about throwing shit to design your game? You know, I guess it makes sense. You barely use the old Wario Land games for design reference for Shake It, so why would you look at anything at all? Oh, but you got Captain Syrup in this game. Fuck off! Who cares? It's like when Iwata asked the Splatoon devs about Mario Sunshine and they went, "Oh, I forgot about that game. I never made the connection. Come on!" You know, I guess in that way, it makes sense Goodfield later went on to make Yoshi games with the same mechanic, and I heard good things about Woolly World, so maybe that game's the evolved version of this idea that I want. You know, speaking of Yoshi's Island, Nintendo's usually all about using a console's capabilities to the fullest in whatever game they're making. So I'm surprised the GBA version of Yoshi's Island didn't have an option for tilting the handheld to aim your shot. I mean, hell, Wario did that with WarioWare Twisted, but you know, I guess Yoshi did it later with Topsy Turvy. Hey, Kirby did it too with Tilt and Tump. What the hell is going on here? Why is no one talking about how similar these three are? They all transform, they all have games made by Goodfield, they all have tilt games on the Game Boy. This can't be a coincidence. Nintendo's been out of ideas for decades. They've just been selling you the same thing all this time. Triple Deluxe is a Virtual Boy Wario Land copy. Oh my god! It feels like they wanted to circumvent all this bland gameplay with replayability, but like I said before, it's really arbitrary. There's optional missions in each level that, when completed, grant the player a star that does nothing. You know, for as eccentric of a mechanic collecting treasure is in this game, and how much they encourage you to do so, and how obsessed this game is with taking from its predecessors in pointless ways, you'd think they'd bring back the score-based endings for this one. Instead, you use treasure to buy fucking area maps so you can play the game. Please! Anyway, there's really no point in doing any of these fucking dumb missions. None of them change the level in any way. They aren't designed in a way where you can complete them all at once, forcing you to replay a level more than once if you want to get everything. But why would you want to get everything when getting everything nets you nothing? Oh boy, my room has a bunch of treasure now. Fuck you! Maybe it's just because I'm tired, but I think I fucking hate this game. I'm not going to be doing an extensive talk about all the bosses in this game because I'd be wasting my time, but the only time Shake It held my attention was during the final boss. You're facing the main villain of the game, the Shake King. Oh, it's like shaking. I get it, haha. When he runs at you, you can stun him so that you're able to grab him and shake the shit out of him. for making you play such a boring game. He's the one interactable in the game that spills so much dough out of him it can be really satisfying to drain him of all he's worth. What's cool too is that he does the same thing to you later in the fight, and it's a really demoralizing thing. This fight is the highlight of the game, which is really unfortunate because it's at the very end. There was a lot of thought put into how it functions, which is a breath of fresh air considering the rest of the bosses, which I don't even want to talk about because they're your basic boring boo-boo whatever fuck off platformer bosses. I don't want to talk about them. This game feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be other than a boring, run-of-the-mill platformer, something Wario Land discreetly is not. Even the worst games in the series have at least unique things about them that make up their own identity. One is rough around the edges, but it's at least trying to be something, an inverse of a Mario game. It's slower paced and has a lot of boring open parts, but its fun parts are always right around the corner. Virtual Boy Wario Land has boring bosses, but makes up for it in its levels and its priority to surpass previous Nintendo platformers' athleticism. 2 and 3 try to fuse Metroid and Mario sensibilities to a fault, but it sets them apart as unique in their own right. And 4 is just perfect. Shake It just lacks the identity entirely. You'd think it would be able to make up for it with its art, but even that isn't all there. It tries to take things that worked in the original 5 games, like transformations or the escape sequences from 4, but doesn't commit to them or work to evolving those ideas. It makes it not even worth talking about. It's kind of a shame because this was the last time we saw Wario Land in any capacity. I actually see people talking about how they like this game a lot, but I don't know, it's kinda shitty. Actually, I think it's really shitty. There's a lot to enjoy about the art, even if it wasn't for me, but the game itself is just a gimmicky nightmare of uncapitalized potential that was already filled by games that came before it. Shake It has really easy shoes to fill, and all it needed to do was improve on what was there, but instead of it being an evolution of the series, it was completely dumbed down. Maybe not every game in a series needs to be better than the last. Whether it be taking the fundamentals to their next logical step or reintroducing the series to a crowd of newer people, every sequel project has its own priorities. The most disappointing thing about Shake It is that it feels like they really did try to reinvent the series while still maintaining aspects about it they thought people liked, but just resulted in a boring experience. It's like they didn't understand what made the original so well loved to begin with, but were tasked at making a sequel instead of something original with the character. They just didn't push on the gas hard enough and ended up getting rear-ended by the dude behind them at the McDonald's drive-thru.
Get real, will ya?
Yeah.
Get real.
Yeah, get real. You just hit my car.
I get that this is Goodfield's first serious game, but with the talent they had on, it's really disappointing to see such a boring game in a really interesting franchise. I hate to say they ruined their chance, because I really do think they could make something great, but I think giving this to Goodfield was a bad idea. If Nintendo was so keen on giving Wario to Goodfield for a project, I think it would have benefited not only the end product, but also the studio to give them full creative control. I'm imagining an alternate universe where Goodfield was told to make a Wario platformer that wasn't in the Wario Land series, but still made use of the Wii's capabilities. It could have still had all the motion stuff in there, but giving them free reign to stray away from the fundamentals of the previous Wario platformers could have resulted in something infinitely cooler. Maybe it could have even started a new line of Wario platformers, a series that takes advantage of each of the unique characteristics of the console it's on. It would be like what WarioWare is, but for platformers. Hell, Wario World kind of fits this bill. Why didn't they just continue with that instead? They made it right after Wario Land 4. Seemed like they were setting up Wario to start his journey into 3D, but they dropped it right after the game came out. Nintendo's done this kind of idea before with games like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. That game isn't a sequel to Donkey Kong Country or anything, but it's still a 2D DK platformer, just with its own set of rules. They're games within the same genre and franchise, but exist separately from each other. I'd love to see them take this direction with Wario someday, or just revisit Wario Land at all, whether it be a new game or a remake or something. Boring shit like Shake It pisses me off more than games that try their hardest to do something new but fail, so this makes Shake It my least favorite entry in the Wario Land series, and it's probably just the worst overall. I'm sorry I didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of why I feel this way, but what the hell did you want me to say? There's really nothing here to talk about. It's all just lame. So what the hell's up with all these games? Well, I'll tell you what. Nothing!
Now get out! What? Get out!
I honestly started all this having just a passive interest in Wario Land, but now that we're at the end, I think I honestly just wanted an excuse to check out and dissect the series like this. There's a really captivating history here to me, down to the connections between projects from those who worked on the games, to the progression of Wario's character, to the quality of the actual games. I wasn't expecting to get so much out of this. I think Wario went from something I couldn't give much of a shit about to something really important to me. These games are really something special, and I think each one of them offers something unique to all kinds of people, depending on what they're looking for in a platformer. To explain what I mean, I've designated each game into their own subgroups, and I've been referring to them as such more or less this entire time. Action platformer, puzzle platformer, and blend. Action and puzzle platformer are pretty self-explanatory, but I've described Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4 as blend multiple times so far and just kinda held on it. So what the fuck does that mean? Well, I made it up. In this case, it basically just means it's taking the best parts of an action platformer and the best parts of a puzzle platformer and literally blending them together. Now, I don't like some random YouTuber guy making up game genres as much as you do. I've had enough of this fucking Wario-like video in my recommended, but I think this is important because these two games, especially Wario Land 4, really stand on their own. They aren't wholly action or puzzle oriented. They're a yummy sandwich of the two you can order on your lunch break. So I had to call them something to fit them in this chart I made describing each game. And mixture sounded gay, so I'm not doing that. Now hey, I know that sounds academic, but I'm not. I'm not your teacher, and I've definitely never stepped foot in a classroom, so I'm not gonna sit here and act like I think I know what a Venn diagram is. In fact, I know this isn't how one works, but this was the only way I could figure out how to visualize what the fuck I'm talking about, okay? I don't know why I'm so angry here. It's kind of funny. I made Wario Land 1 completely represent the action platformer section since it's definitely the one Wario Land game that is just trying to be a good action game. It's simple. It isn't doing anything crazy or trying to reinvent the genre. It's just trying to be fun, which it is. And that, in turn, ended up reinventing the wheel, at least for Mario games at the time. Now, from here we can go two directions. We can go the Hosokawa route, or we can go to the Matsuoka route. Taking the Hosokawa direction, we get Wario Land 2, which is definitely still a platformer. Wario has all his moves from the last game, some new ones, and the point of the game is to reach the goal in each level. What sets Wario Land 2 apart, though, is that eventually you realize it has multiple exits in specific levels, which will take you down different paths to different final bosses, endings, etc. There's an aspect of puzzle solving to traversing the world of the game. You do it to figure out which levels have extra exits and which don't, but it isn't the entire focus around the game. You can experience everything it has to offer without deviating from the main path, and I think the way this works is really ambitious. The game leans toward being a puzzle platformer with action elements, which sets Wario Land 3 up to be a full-fledged puzzle platformer. You need to unlock your moves by exploring. Every level has like 4 exits. Its full focus is on being a puzzle platformer, edging on Metroidvania. It sucks! Taking the Matsuoka route, we get to Virtual Boy Wario Land, which has aspects of both the original game and its Game Boy sequels, but transformed these ideas to be applicable to a more athletic game. It definitely wants you to have the bulk of your fun by jumping around more than it wants you to have fun by exploring your surroundings and shit. But that being said, both genres are represented in ways that perpetuate the game's flow-based movement priority. It's the beginnings of a perfect blend to both of the core genres. Wario Land 4 is a big yummy sandwich with the olives flicked off, cause that shit's nasty. It's the perfect combination of everything Wario Land had covered at that point with the shit that didn't work left out, which validates its position as a blend game. It isn't more so an action platformer than it is a puzzle one, and it isn't more so a puzzle platformer than it is an action one. It's handcrafted to be as balanced as it possibly could be, which it succeeds in with flying colors. And this doesn't mean it's a perfect game, but it does make it a damn great one. And Shake It, nah. The point of this visual is to have all the games in one place. With this, you can apply your own game preferences to see which of these games might be the best for you. If you're into simpler experiences, you might want to check out Wario Land 1. It's a bite-sized joy to play that's really tightly packed and thought out. Hell, if you liked it, you might even want to check out Shake It as well. As much as I've been shitting on it, Shake It's definitely a meaty casual platformer. While that might not be something I'm in the market for, and I ultimately think the game wasn't worth my time, that doesn't mean it won't be worth yours. I think it's a pretty good companion piece to the original game. They definitely work together as fun experiences for someone who might not be looking for something as complex as Wario Land 3 or something as difficult as Wario Land 4. If you dig dense games with a lot to find and squeeze dry of, you might want to check out Wario Land 2 and 3. They're huge games crafted with a lot of love. Maybe not enough attention, but that's okay. They're trying something really unique with their game philosophy, and I think they ought to be commended for something like that, especially for the time. Tons of people cite these games as their absolute favorites of the series for good reason. If you want my opinion, Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4 definitely ended up being my favorites, They both just embody everything I like about all the ideas presented, which makes them easily recommendable to anyone interested in any of the previous games. It feels like they were somehow made for everyone to get a handle on and enjoy, but
refused to pull any punches when it came to mechanics or game structure.
They aren't hardcore or anything, but they offer up a lot of engaging gameplay and never at the expense of your patience. All they really need to do to be perfect games in my eyes is swap out Wario for Sonic and add a couple of loop-de-loop. Looking at the whole thing altogether, I hope you can see where I'm coming from when I say there's a Wario Land game for every kind of platformer fan. This is definitely one of Nintendo's more interesting series of platformers. I think their insistence on never revisiting it is reflective of their creative fall, but it also oddly maintains the series' mystique. If we got another Wario Land and it was absolutely dog shit, it would be a really strange blemish on this really thumbs-up series. Shake-It's already a pretty bad pimple scar, so honestly, I don't think I want any more Wario Land, at least not by Nintendo.
If they were to do anything else with the series, I'd want it to be re-releases of Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4, mostly because those games are hard to play nowadays legally.
They're both rare as fuck. Every fucking game store I go to tells me they sold out of them the day before I got there. Either they're lying to me, or I'm on their do not sell to list. If only there was some kind of successor to the series not made by Nintendo that takes inspiration from all the important characteristics of each game, evolves them further than they have been before, and introduces enough original into the mix for the end result to stand on its own individually. Oh wait!
In the interest of maintaining my honest opinion, I go off script a little bit here, so if the delivery sucks, bear with me.
If you've been paying attention at all over the course of this video, you probably picked up that I'm pretty fucking harsh on indie games. They're usually made by a small group of individuals, sometimes just one fucking guy, so the gate to make a fuck ton of mistakes and just let it happen is huge. You're not working with a team of people who can check your work for you based on their experience coding on like fucking Burger Time. You have complete freedom. You don't got some four-eyed Japanese fuck bitching in your ear about UV unwrapping something sloppily or a white-skinned sex pest calling you into his office for a private meeting. You can do whatever the hell you want, but that also means there's more of a chance you're gonna fuck something up royally in the design or programming phase, and your project can come out half-baked or just not come out at all. I have a huge amount of respect for people who do get their projects out, but since they are individuals working within their own guidelines, whenever an indie game comes out and it's supposedly the next best thing since sliced bread, I raise an eyebrow. I'm not gonna give indie devs any stolen valor or credit based on the grounds that I could probably spot them having a mental breakdown in the women's section of my local Target. Holy fuck! I'm gonna be as honest as I can and tell it like how I would tell Miyamoto, even if there's a higher chance indie devs will hear the criticism I'm putting out there. That all being said though, I won't have to be as hyperbolically rude as I usually am to indie games with Pizza Tower, cause this shit's actually fucking good. I'm not here to give you anything that's too in-depth on the game, mostly because it's not even out yet at the time of recording this, but I am here to recommend it to you since there's some public builds out there already.
Of course, as easy as it is to compare this game to Wario Land, it really is its own thing and should be treated as such. I'm only really bringing it up in tandem with Wario Land because of its origins and upbringing, but again, it really is its own thing. Like Freedom Planet isn't a Sonic game, but there's really clear influences there, so it's worth bringing up when talking about it.
It's kind of like that, but you know, Pizza Tower doesn't suck like Freedom Planet. It's being directed and designed by this dude named Pizza Tower Guy, but he's getting some programming help from a few others as well. PTG's been making games since forever, and he hadn't really found his footing until he started development on this game called Pizza Massacre, which was supposed to be a weapon-focused action game starring this pizza man, Peppino. PTG wasn't really feeling the game, but he liked the foundation enough to retool it into a project that was meant to be a successor to Wario Land 4 with more of an emphasis on the branching states the character could enter. Skip ahead a bit, a few public builds had been released, more information came out over time, and all of a sudden, this is one of the most promising upcoming indie platformers. As you'd imagine, the game uses Wario's movement structure as a base, you know. You got your shoulder bash, your run, transformations, escaping the level through the way you came in, all the good stuff. But then you have things that are wholly unique to the game, like running up walls, canceling states into other moves, screen clears, combat moves aside from throwing, a combo system, characters that function completely different from each other. You have a fuck ton of options here. Everything about the way the characters work are very obviously based around Wario, but everything added on top of that makes me forget this is even Wario inspired sometimes. It really transcends that label. PTG even stated that even though Wario Land is like a huge influence on the game, other games like Earthworm Jim and Jazz Jackrabbit influenced the player movement and stage design's relationship. I've seen this game described as Wario meets Sonic a lot, and while I can definitely see it, I think the Jazz Jackrabbit comparison is a little more apt. You're winding around these playground levels in a way really similar to that game, and I can definitely feel the impact the series has on Pizza Tower just by looking at it. But what's so great about Pizza Tower in relation to Wario Land is that you can tell the devs really took each of the prominent games in that series and put them under a magnifying glass. A ton of work went into making this game a proper evolution of the ideas introduced in Wario Land 4, but there are a ton of aspects present here that are definitely drawn from the other games, even 2 and 3. The overall speed of the game is akin to how fast you can go in Virtual Boy Wario Land, and the secret rooms and treasures remind me a lot of Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land secret stuff. Some of the builds even have extra goals for you to complete in the levels, a much more digestible version of the same idea introduced in 3 and Shake Its missions. This determination to evolve what was introduced for Wario Land goes as far as the visual style for the game even. I know I mentioned this before, but comparing Wario Land 4 and Pizza Tower's visual styles and how they contribute and fit with the gameplay is like comparing night and day. Pizza Tower's more haphazard animation and loose pixel-brushed assets are coupled with the insane movement you'll end up doing in the game, and I really can't imagine this game looking any other way. Even down to the music, this shit rules. The music in this game is being done by a Mr. Sauceman and Frostix, but its main theme was done by Post Elvis, who does a lot of freelance work for a bunch of indie games. I like his work a lot in specific. I sort of hope he's able to do more tracks for the game. Anyway, they use a lot of the same musical techniques used in Wario Land 4. They do like the voice sampling or sometimes even using the exact same organ, but the composition themselves are a lot more memorable and catchy than anything in any Wario Land. This shit gets stuck in my head all the time. These tracks don't fuck around when they need to give off a specific tone. There's a Bone in My Spaghetti and Pizza Mayhem in particular are some of the most standout tracks for me. I love the electric guitar and vocals used in both. If anything, I can't wait for this game to release on Steam so I can buy a game with its soundtrack for the first time in my fucking life. It's got fucking multiplayer, it's got a fucking pinball level. I know I sound like every other YouTube game guy who's talked about this game so far. That is to say, I'm sucking it off, but it really is just that good. If there's one thing that Pizza Tower does infinitely better than every Wario Land game, it's that you can actually reliably climb ladders. Wario can't do that shit. He's either not close enough or too fucking close! That's the end of the video.